Infinite Evolution, The Void Rises in the Marvel Universe. Episode 16, Change of Mind. When Harvey finished eating and came out, he saw Stark standing on the steps in front of the entrance of the venue, with a sad expression on his face. "I told you, trust your instincts." Harvey walked past Tony Stark and spoke. "You're right, but Obadiah watched me grow up. Even if my intuition is so, I still can't make up my mind until I see him take the initiative to show malice towards me, and conclude that he did it." Tony Stark heard Harvey's tone that seemed to have expected everything, fell silent for a moment, and then spoke. But just now he went to ask Obadiah Stanley to question, and the response he got was that Obadiah Stanley wanted to strip him from the board of directors. It can be said that Obadiah Stanislav has shown his ambition to take control of Stark Industries from him. He didn't know when Obadiah Stane had the idea, but the best way to seize power was to get rid of him. He demonstrated technological weapons with the military in Afghanistan. Generally speaking, it was impossible for those people in Afghanistan to know where he was and to ambush him in advance. So Tony Stark didn't think it was the sudden intention of those terrorists to attack America's military at will, it must be a premeditated action. Therefore, he has been thinking and wondering who betrayed his itinerary. It never occurred to me that it was really Obadiah Stane. Although Harvey has not experienced it personally, he also knows that the feeling of being betrayed by his relatives and his eyes must not be so easy to accept. If you've affirmed your enemies, don't be merciful. Otherwise, after something happens, it will be too late. So Harvey just gave some reminders again, and didn't say any words of comfort. Hearing Harvey Ambaraka's reminder, Tony Stark seemed to see through his inner struggle, his eyes flickered. Although he had many questions, he didn't ask anything this time. Although Harvey Ambaraka is very mysterious and seems to know everything. But what is certain is that they are not enemies. At least for now, Harvey Ambaraka has not shown any intention of harming him. Originally, Tony Stark wanted to find Obadiah Stane's tell and was acting. But Harvey Ambaraka's reminder just now made Tony Stark have made a choice. Tony Stark also left the venue and went directly back to Stark Manor. Harvey also returned home. After the huge amount of evolution points brought by the meal just now, Harvey ushered in the 265th evolution again. Purple light covered Harvey's body, after a short time. Harvey's void skin has also successfully evolved to 46 times. Harvey decided to evolve the void skin 100 times, before evolving in other directions. After all, many heroes in the Marvel world are not physically resistant to beating, but their attacks are very strong. If he wanted to live safely, physical strength was the most important thing. As long as he is not killed by a single blow, he can make a comeback at any time. Originally, Harvey didn't intend to influence Tony Stark too much, but this time he will remind Tony Stark because he has already figured it out. Except that Tony Stark escaped from the dead and completed the psychological transformation to become the keynote of Iron Man. Some other small things should be properly affected. In the end, Obadiah Stane will be removed by Tony Stark. Since then, without the influence of others, Tony Stark has completely controlled the future direction of the Stark industry. If he can't influence at all except the key nodes, just because of a few reminders from himself, this universe becomes not the main universe. Then if he lures Tony Stark to believe in the void in the future, it will also make this place no longer the main universe. That's why Harvey figured it out and went to the party. And even if the universe he is currently in is not the main universe, it will only affect some of his future plans, and will not affect his safety. Except that he can't proclaim the void and provoke Ancient One and Odin, he can do everything else with his heart. Feeling the power in his body, Harvey began to adapt in the basement. The void skin not only enhanced his physical defensibility, but also enhanced his strength. Although the extent of improvement did not directly evolve those active skills, it was still weakly improving his strength. This is why Harvey is currently keen on improving the void skin. Definitely spiritual resistance also needs to be improved, but there is no need to worry too much at the moment. After all, opponents at the magic level will at least wait for mage of the level of Scarlet Wanda to appear before he will face enemies with magic. And there is no need to be too afraid, even if the opponent's magic is strong, he is not qualified to fight him head-on. Because before the other party made a move, he was able to fight out in the dark, and silently severely injured or even killed the other party. Harvey spent more than $3 billion at one time this time, and after removing some inherent assets, the working capital in his hand is only $100 million. So Harvey opened the black net casually, wanting to make a few orders to earn some extra money. It's just that Harvey took a look and found that there were only some small orders of $1 million to $2 million left. And it's still a guard order, which needs to be protected for a week or half a month to complete. These tasks are often groups of several mercenaries who like to do the list. Because guarding means having time to set up your defenses and kill enemies. Therefore, $1 million a week is not a small amount. But for Harvey, if he has time to do these small orders, he might as well save time, eat more, and tried to evolve himself a few times earlier. Finding that there was no list of looting and annihilation worth more than 5 million yuan, Harvey closed the black net, walked into the basement, and started his daily exercise. Just the act of Harvey Ambaraka feasting at a charity ball hosted by Stark Industries. Although it did not spread in all directions in New York, it also spread secretly among the upper class in New York. Many high-ranking people in New York felt disdainful when they heard it, but they were also a little envious. Because they have enjoyed a rich life for many years, their appetite has become more and more difficult. Many foods are tasted for a few bites, and after a few bites, they will lose their appetite. Most of the people who despised Harvey Ambaraka were upper-class men. Some women in the upper class have developed a strong interest in Harvey Ambaraka, who has a great appetite. Harvey Ambaraka didn't go to any parties before, so even if they were interested in finding Harvey Ambaraka, there was no excuse. But now it was different, and Harvey Ambaraka began to appear in some evening parties held by the upper class. Although Harvey Ambaraka has participated in a charity gala held by Stark Industries, this is already a signal. They can also try to invite them in the future, just in case they come over. Episode 17, The Gate to the New World. The next day, a piece of news suddenly appeared on the news. At 4 o'clock in the morning, Stark Industry was attacked by terrorists, and the offices of Stark's top executives were all destroyed, but fortunately there were no casualties. The terrorist is currently unidentified. As soon as the news came out, many people in New York who didn't know the truth happily ate melons. Some people think that this is a stupid decision announced by Tony Stark, the chairman of Stark Industries, and it has attracted retaliation. Some people thought that someone wanted to take the opportunity to bring down Stark Industries, so they launched an attack at this moment. Some people also ridiculed that the defense system of Stark Industries is useless, and even if it is attacked, there is no trace of the assailant. It can be said that early in the morning, countless people in New York had a joke that they could enjoy breakfast. If it was before, many people would definitely feel sad because of the attack on Stark Industries. Because many people hold the shares of Stark Industries, if some of Stark Industries' reputation is damaged or the valuation drops, they will feel distressed for a long time. But now that they've all sold their stocks, the more miserable Stark Industries is, the happier they are. Harvey also woke up at 8 o'clock in the morning and was eating his first meal of the day. His eating habit is 1 meal in the morning, 1 meal at noon, 1 meal in the afternoon, 1 meal in the evening, and 1 meal at night. When Harvey saw the news, he knew that Tony Stark had already started to act. But Tony Stark, there are obviously many ways to get what he wants with the least loss, but it is not appropriate to choose such a method. It's just that Harvey thought about it carefully. Tony Stark has just produced the iron armor, so he hasn't fully adapted to his strength and used his ability reasonably for a while, so it's understandable. Although Iron Man's armor is just the beginning, the destructive power it causes is extremely astonishing, almost equivalent to the anthropomorphism of the most advanced fighter. And after being constantly improved, Iron Man's power is simply not something that human technology can compete with. But this kind of powerful force did not make Tony Stark black and go the way of the villain, all thanks to the incident in Afghanistan. After thinking about it for a while, Harvey finished his breakfast, put on the Death God cloak to cover his whole body, and decided to go to Afghanistan to take a look. Although Tony Stark obtained the evidence of Obadiah Stanislav, Tony Stark should still go to save the people in Gumera, Afghanistan first. After all, it is a trouble created by the Stark industry, and Tony Stark, the person in power, needs to deal with it. To win over Tony Stark, he still needs to make some more preparations. So Harvey turned on the void attack, and his body directly escaped into the void and left the house. Harvey's current speed has reached Mach 4, and Harvey himself doesn't know how fast he will be when he transforms back into the void predator Shadow of Kha'Zix. But at present, he doesn't need to use such a fast speed to quickly go to Afghanistan, where he has been to countless times in the past few years. Afghanistan is currently in a period of war where the weak are preying on the strong, and terrorists are rampant, but there are really people walking around with guns and cannons. Many mercenaries die in Afghanistan every year, but it is undeniable that Afghanistan is still a paradise for mercenaries. Some mercenaries have obtained a large amount of arms, and it is not uncommon for them to become terrorists directly on the spot. In contrast, New York, which is known as Hell's Kitchen, is suppressed by the military, at least not so excessively on the surface. Harvey was under high altitude, full-speed flight, and it only took about 2 hours to go to Afghanistan. So Harvey came to this land he was familiar with. The smoke of war filled the air, and there were purgatory everywhere. Harvey saw no change in these eyes. In his previous life, Harvey admired superheroes. He possessed all kinds of super abilities, and he also wanted to save thousands of people for good. But Harvey admires it anyway, he doesn't want to be a superhero himself. Because those who were saved in the first place will think that being saved because of you is a great kindness, and they are grateful to you. But the number of rescues has increased, and a strong man has become a superhero in the eyes of others. Countless people will think that protecting and rescuing them is some kind of obligation, and then stand on the moral high ground and think that this is what you should do. It seems to have forgotten that superhero does not necessarily have the obligation to save sentient beings. The saying that with greater power comes greater responsibility is just a rhetoric for the weak to kidnap the strong with words and morality. Don't you see that most of the strong men in the universe rely on their own mood to do things? Why haven't they been kidnapped by morality? Because they have wiped out those who kidnapped them by morality. As a strong man, Harvey does not want to be kidnapped by the weak with morality. He just wants to live freely, and freely by his own will. He can rescue and even help the weak, but he does not do it because of some kind of obligation, but because he wants to do it, even if it is just a whim. That's what he wanted to do, not being instructed or kidnapped by morality. When Harvey came all the way to Gumara, a figure in a handsome gold and red armor was fighting terrorists. It's just that there are some noticeable pauses between Iron Man's moves. It can be seen that Tony Stark does not have enough combat experience now, and the use of various weapons in his hands does not seem to be smooth enough. However, even if the combat experience is slightly insufficient, the gap between the technological combat power still allows Iron Man to kill the terrorists of 10 rings and save a group of people in Gumara without any risk. Just when Tony Stark solved the battle, a chilly breath seemed to make the surrounding temperature drop a few degrees. Sir, a life target was detected 100 meters above the southeast direction. Hearing this, Tony Stark looked up in that direction and saw a figure covered by a pitch-black cloak. Jarvis, can you detect his identity? Tony Stark saw that this figure was not relying on anything, just suspended in the air, and the feeling it exuded was extremely dangerous. His eyes shrank, and he asked hastily. Testing. Failed to detect. Unidentified. Jarvis also checked after hearing the words, and found that there was no information related to this figure in his database. As a human being, you must have a pretty good brain to be able to make this kind of thing. At this time, Harvey spoke, and the cold voice sounded in the sky. The sound is like a gust of cold wind, and people can't help but feel their scalp numb when they hear it. Many people in Gumara, even crying children, were so frightened that they stopped crying. Is this a compliment to me? Thank you so much. I'm confident in my head. Tony Stark's body also rose into the air, reaching a height of 100 meters. He didn't know whether this person was an enemy or a friend, but since the other party had spoken, he naturally responded. You can understand this as a compliment. But the technology you made is only stronger than humans. Looking at the universe, your technology is far from enough. You are too weak now. I hope that when I see you next time, you can invent something that makes me feel even more novel. Harvey looked at Iron Man and said. After the voice fell, Harvey's figure disappeared out of thin air. Seeing this figure disappear in an instant, Tony Stark narrowed his eyes and said directly, Jarvis. Sir, no signs of life were detected from that unknown creature, as if it had completely disappeared. Jarvis also understood what Tony Stark meant, and immediately deployed the radar to start detection, but the result was that the other party was not found, and reported slightly apologetically. Tony Stark's heart sank when he heard Jarvis say that he could not detect the other party. Although the voice of this unidentified figure makes people feel creepy, it can make Tony Stark hear the meaning of approval. It's just that Tony Stark wasn't happy about being praised for his brains. Because he had never heard of such an existence on Blue Star. There are actually intelligent creatures in this world that can fly out of thin air without any power. It made Tony Stark feel as if he had accidentally opened the door to an unknown world. Whether this is a good thing or a bad thing, Tony Stark doesn't know yet. But Tony Stark remembered that the other party commented on his technology, which was too weak compared to the universe. It means that the other party knows the universe very well, or is the other party an alien? Thinking about it, the artificial intelligence Jarvis, which he was proud of, failed to find the trace of the other party. Only when the other party showed up did Jarvis suddenly notify himself that existence had appeared. He didn't even know whether the other party had just arrived, or if he was there to watch him rescue Gumara. It seems that a door to a new world has been opened by accident. Facing such an unknown creature not only makes Tony Stark feel excited, but also feels anxious. What is the origin of the other party? Is it a creature belonging to Blue Star? If not, what is the purpose of the other party coming to Blue Star? After Tony Stark thought about it, he realized how little he knew. Immediately, Tony Stark returned with a heavy heart. He still has some things to do at hand now, and he wants to get rid of the trouble of Obadiah Stane completely. After he finishes dealing with these matters, he will investigate the existence of that unknown creature in detail. Harvey looked at Tony Stark floating in the air blankly, and he seemed to be lost in thought before leaving Gumara. Harvey knew his identity and had already left an impression on Tony Stark. Next, as long as Tony Stark intends to understand, he will further deepen his impression and learn about the unknown place of the void. This time, the purpose of coming here has been achieved, so Harvey also returned. The most important thing to win over Tony Stark is to make an impression. As long as the impression is left, according to Tony Stark's character of constant thinking and chasing the truth, they will definitely meet again. Episode 18, Tony's Means. On the way back, Tony Stark was intercepted by 2 fighter planes. After a lot of evasion, Tony Stark managed to return to the Stark Manor in New York. After returning home, Tony Stark directly ordered Jarvis to sort out all the evidence of the crimes committed by Obadiah Stane. Afterwards, Tony Stark took the initiative to explain that a board meeting would be held in the evening. And Tony Stark also asked Colonel Rhodes to wait for his own news before acting. Although he has made a steel battle suit, it is not yet time to announce it. And he didn't want to use the steel battle suit to run amok, so it can't be called atonement for his past crimes. Without being able to wear a steel battle suit, Tony Stark was originally a common man, so he naturally had to worry about whether Obadiah Stane would jump over the wall in a hurry and suddenly attack him. Although Tony Stark was designed by Obadiah Stane to strip him of the board of directors, the news that Tony Stark took the initiative to convene the board of directors is still appealing. Everyone in Stark Industries who has the right to enter the board of directors has received the news. Originally, because Stark Industries was attacked in the morning, the board of directors of Stark Industries was going to discuss a decision. Now Tony Stark's call brought them all together. Obadiah Stane was shocked to hear that Tony was calling a board meeting, but decided to go anyway. Soon it was 5 o'clock in the afternoon. There are numerous guards patrolling around the Stark Industrial Building. At the moment, Stark Industries meeting room. Tony Stark looked at the old antiques sitting around a table, all of whom were in their 40s and 50s, and Harvey Ambaraka was not among them. He knew Harvey Ambaraka, and must have known some of his thoughts and actions. Otherwise, Harvey Ambaraka should also come and listen to this kind of matter that could cause other shareholders on the board of directors to worry about it, and discuss the policy. Obadiah Stanislav has basically bought other shareholders in power within the Stark company by him. Half of the entire board of directors belonged to him, which was also the key to his daring to come to the appointment. However, it has not completely torn skin, so we still have to respect what should be respected. Tony, what are you trying to say by summoning us this time? Obadiah Stane looked at Tony and asked with a smile. Before I explain, I want you to see something. Jarvis out. Tony Stark saw that Obadiah Stane was still pretending, so he didn't respond, but gave an order to himself. Jarvis received the instructions and immediately released the video evidence that had been sorted out. And these images are all evidence that Obadiah Stane instructed 10 rings to kill him. The time record in the upper right corner of the impact shows that the time of the conversation was 1 month before Tony Stark decided to go to Afghanistan. It can be said that the itinerary has been exposed long ago. There are also images of Tony Stark who was seriously injured and dying after being attacked a month later. In the follow-up, Obadiah Stane explained to the group of terrorists in 10 rings that after the value of Tony Stark was squeezed out, he would kill him. The entire board of directors watched these images in silence. Even the other shareholders who were persuaded to buy by Obadiah Stane, at the moment, felt chilled. They would be persuaded by Obadiah Stane simply because Tony Stark decided to shut down the weapons department without any consultation. Damaged their interests and wealth, so they joined the ranks of Obadiah Stane and pulled Tony Stark from the position of chairman. Unexpectedly, it was rumored that Tony Stark, who had only traveled to Afghanistan for 2 months, encountered a deliberate murder there. If Tony Stark hadn't laid out the evidence, they would still have been kept in the dark by Obadiah Stanislav. Obadiah Stane can erase Tony Stark silently like this, then if they stand in the wrong place in the future, or be regarded as worthless. Will I also be eliminated silently like this? Although Tony Stark escaped without knowing what blessing he received, it doesn't mean that everyone can survive in the face of terrorist attacks. Obadiah Stane, you watched me grow up, so I've always seen you as an uncle to be respected. Our cooperation over the years, we can't say that we are intimate, but we all perform our own duties, making Stark Industry stronger and stronger. Some of my inventions and plans have not been deliberately concealed from you. So I always thought, our relationship is pretty good. But I never thought that there would be a day when I would be betrayed by Uncle. Tony Stark felt the silence in the conference room, looked at Obadiah Stane whose face became gloomy because of the complete exposure of his deeds, and said with some sadness in his eyes. Knowing that all of this was done by Obadiah Stanislav, Tony Stark recalled that he had just successfully tested and made the military tempted to buy their Stark Industry technology. Obadiah Stane contacted him immediately to ask how he was doing. It's not that he is concerned that things are not going well, but that he has arrived at the designated military test base in Afghanistan. After confirming it, after hanging up the phone, Obadiah Stane immediately put the message on 10 rings, and thinking about it made Tony Stark sick. Afterwards, Tony Stark finished speaking and pressed a button. With a sound of bang, the door of the meeting room was directly opened. The sound of uniformed footsteps came, and a group of FBI led by Colonel Rhodes immediately filed in. Crack. 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 A pistol was aimed at Obadiah Stanislaus. A group of shareholders on the board of directors were too scared to move. Obadiah Stanis, you colluded with terrorists to sell national intelligence, which resulted in the loss of some national talents. And willful murder of Tony Stark, you're under arrest. Colonel Rhodes watched as Obadiah Stanley declared the other party's crime. Obadiah Stane's wealth and means are suspected of murder, and he is expected to be released from prison. However, after colluding with terrorists and being suspected of betraying national intelligence, Obadiah Stanley spent the rest of his life in prison. I want to make a call, these things and… Obadiah Stane stood up, and as he spoke, he was about to make a phone call, but his hand just slipped into his bosom. Colonel Rhodes shot a bang, and killed Obadiah Stane on the spot. Obadiah Stane had cost his men some brothers, and had him blame his superiors. The terrorists were not so easy to deal with, but now it was known that Obadiah Stane had colluded with him and lost his brother. So Colonel Rhodes didn't give Obadiah Stanis any chance to explain at all. Take it away. Colonel Rhodes looked at the other trembling shareholders in the conference room, and said something coldly. The two soldiers carried Obadiah Stane away directly. Okay, let's continue the meeting. Now we have to discuss the future direction of Stark Industry. Tony Stark is a man who has been to the cruel and merciless Afghanistan once, so his face didn't change much for this battle, and he spoke. Facing Tony Stark, who obviously had a deep relationship with the military, none of the shareholders present dared to object to Tony Stark's opinion. Episode 19. I didn't expect you to be so poor. The news of Obadiah Stanley's death was directly covered up and did not spread in New York. However, the decision-making policy of the energy industry that Stark Industries decided to change careers has been announced. This news made many people in New York not optimistic. Stark Industries is the undisputed leader in the weapons industry, but Stark is not yet a leader in the energy industry. Unless Stark Industries comes up with a cross-age advanced energy source, it is impossible for Stark Industries stock to return to its peak and continue to rise. However, this news has also reassured some people who still hold shares. Although it is difficult to return to the top and switch to the energy industry, but according to the contacts and relationships left by Stark Industries in the past, it is not a problem to gain a foothold in the energy industry. And Tony Stark did not immediately announce the news of the arc reactor, because it was not yet time. His own battle armor needs further modification. And he has to find a way to make the arc reactor really be used in the energy industry, so as not to be used by some interested people. As long as it is done well, it will not be difficult for Stark Industries stock to return to its peak or even rise even higher. After Obadiah Stanley, the biggest trouble at present is resolved, he still has a lot of things to do. But there was no doubt that he was not in such a hurry, so after Tony Stark returned to Stark Manor, he took the initiative to contact Harvey Ambaraka. I want to share my joy with Harvey Ambaraka, and chat with him to see if I can get some other information. Sir, the other party refused to listen. It didn't take long for Jarvis's words to pour a glass of cold water on Tony Stark's head. Tony Stark heard that the other party didn't ignore it, but directly refused to listen. Who is he? A well-known playboy in New York is also a celebrity among the high class in New York. There has never been anyone who dared to refuse his calls since he was a child. Good guy, how dare you not answer my phone call? The truth made Tony Stark laugh. Continue to contact me. So Tony Stark continued to call Jarvis. Anyway, he doesn't need to do it manually, he can bombard Harvey Ambaraka with information at will. It's just that Jarvis just made a second call, and there is no Jarvis report. The number you have dialed cannot be reached. The appearance of this mechanical female voice made Tony Stark silent. Is there no other way of contacting him? After a pause, Tony Stark asked somewhat unwillingly. If there is no accident, Mr. Harvey Ambaraka should have unplugged the landline directly. Upon hearing this, Jarvis replied. Although Tony Stark was helpless, he temporarily gave up contacting Harvey Ambaraka. As for going to find Harvey Ambaraka, it was absolutely impossible. He really came to look for it, so doesn't that mean he begged Harvey Ambaraka to talk to him? Jarvis also knows Tony's character, so apart from the remote communication methods such as mobile phones and landlines, he didn't suggest that Tony could drive to Harvey Ambaraka's estate and find someone directly. Get me in touch with Pepper, I have something to ask her. Tony Stark opened his mouth and ordered. Pepper was upstairs watching the news when she heard that Obadiah Stane had died. Also know that Obadiah Stane wants to deliberately murder Tony Stark, so she doesn't have much opinion on it. So soon after Payboy received the news, he hurried down. Pepper, do you know Phil Coulson? Tony Stark asked immediately when Pepper came down. I know, but didn't you have no interest in knowing before? When Pepper heard the name, he was stunned for a moment before asking back. I wasn't interested before, but now I am. What is the scope of the Homeland Strategic Defense Attack and Logistics Support Agency's responsibility? Has he told you? Tony Stark walked to a chair and lay down, asking casually. Let me think about it. It seems that it is a special force specially set up by the International Security Council to deal with various strange incidents. Pepper has strong memory and action, so she becomes Tony's right-hand secretary. A strange event, do you have his contact information? Tony Stark heard the scope of responsibility, thought for a while, and asked. Although I don't know if it's useful, but I do have his contact information. Pepper nodded and said. That's right, you can contact Phil Coulson for me. Tell him tomorrow at noon, I want to meet with him and have a chat. Tony Stark immediately instructed after hearing the words. I'll give it a try, I don't know if he's free now. Although Pabwa didn't understand what he said, he immediately took out his mobile phone and started contacting. Miss Pepper Potts, hello. I don't know what you want from me? Just to the surprise of Tony Stark and Pepper, Phil Coulson took it right away. Mr. Tony wants to meet with you at noon tomorrow and have a chat with you. Pepper also explained his thoughts. Okay, see you at noon tomorrow. Phil Coulson is investigating the Iron Man who appeared in Afghanistan. Now that Tony Stark wants to chat with them, he naturally agrees without the slightest hesitation. Phil Coulson would have preferred to go and chat with Tony Stark now. But since Tony Stark has appointed a time, then he will not break this rule and wait for the appointed time to chat. Tony Stark also went to sleep here about that unknown creature. You can't find anything out of him, but that Phil Coulson might be able to know something. Soon at 12 noon the next day, Phil Coulson came to visit Stark Manor on time. The two met in the lobby on the second floor. Hi, Mr. Tony Stark, thank you for agreeing to meet me. Phil Coulson saw Tony Stark and said politely. I don't know, what exactly do you want to know from me? But before that, you have to answer some questions for me. As soon as my problem is solved, then I will tell you what you want to know. Tony Stark met Phil Coulson, and there was no nonsense after that. Okay, you ask first. Phil Coulson knew that Tony Stark was conceited and arrogant, so he didn't mind. About this figure, do you understand? Tony Stark heard that when he pressed the button with his right hand, an image appeared, which was the figure recorded by Jarvis. I know who he is, but can you tell me where you took his image? Phil Coulson's eyes narrowed when he saw the dark shadow in the image that made him and Chief Fury and Natasha Romanoff feel helpless. It's just that this figure was floating in the air and was taken from a flat perspective, so it was impossible to determine its position. Gumera, Afghanistan. Tony Stark paused when he heard that, but he didn't hide anything. If the other party is really a unit that specializes in investigating strange events, then it is not difficult to investigate his identity. Anyway, it will be exposed sooner or later, and it is useless to deliberately hide it. Phil Coulson saw Tony Stark mentioned Afghanistan again, and immediately thought of the Iron Man in Afghanistan. That Iron Man is no accident Tony Stark himself, since Tony Stark has no intention of hiding. So that's the case, so it's not surprising. This creature is an existence that claims to come from the void, and we don't know the real name. However, he is in Blue Star, and has an alias named Death God, who is active in the secret mercenary world. So Phil Coulson also said what he knew. The mercenary world. No wonder Jarvis can't find any news about him. Tony Stark pondered for a while when he heard this word, and he also understood that Jarvis could not judge the other party's identity immediately. Because he has heard of mercenaries in the past, but he himself has no one to help him get rid of, so he has never connected to the dark net and legendary. But now that I know it, Tony Stark immediately ordered Jarvis to connect to the dark web. Mr. Tony Stark, I didn't mean to hit you. Even if your artificial intelligence is connected to the dark net, you can't investigate anything. Our bureau once paid a very expensive price, after meeting with Death God. The same is true for the judgment of the existence of Death God. The appearance is unknown, the strength is unknown, and the origin is unknown. The only thing we know is that he should be a male and extremely dangerous. When Phil Coulson heard that Tony Stark had investigated Death God, he politely reminded him. Yes, sir, what I have been able to investigate is only superficial rumors. Not as much as this Phil Coulson. The voice of Jarvis also rang at this time, but it still released the investigation. Because Jarvis knew that since Tony Stark cared, he wanted to see it. Some records about Death God appeared in front of Tony Stark in the form of fonts. Phil Coulson, you said you could pay a high price to ask him to meet. Why did you want to meet him in the first place, and what was the price you said? Tony Stark asked while looking at the deeds and rumors about Death God circulating on the dark web. The purpose of asking him to meet, I can't tell you yet, I can only tell you when I ask you to get the information I want. However, the price for asking him to meet is to issue a designated task, and the deposit alone will cost tens of millions of dollars. Including the remuneration after completion, at least $20 million will start. Phil Coulson paused and explained. What did you say? Can $20 million be called a high price? Is your department so poor from afar? Tony Stark originally thought that he was able to ask this death god to meet him because he had paid for something precious that money couldn't get. I didn't expect it to be something that can be solved with money. In Tony Stark's view, problems that can be solved with money are not considered a big deal. Our department is not poor, we just need to transfer funds, and we need to plan and apply to be able to mobilize. When Phil Coulson heard Tony Stark's words, there was a hint of embarrassment on his face, and he wanted to explain. To put it bluntly, isn't it that you have to look at the face of the high level in order to mobilize some funds? $20 million, you all need to go through detailed plans and applications before mobilizing. Doesn't it prove that your department is poor? Tony Stark immediately interrupted Phil Coulson's explanation, as if I understood. Send it at the third watch, ask for a ticket, and ask for a follow-up. Episode 20, the result of the negotiation. Seeing Tony Stark's beating tone, Phil Coulson couldn't help feeling angry, but the quality of a professional agent made him restrain himself. He wasn't here to argue with Tony Stark, but to talk and get some information. Mr. Tony Stark, I have given you some information. Should I ask now? So Phil Coulson held back his anger and said politely. You can ask. Tony Stark was surprised to see Phil Coulson clenched his fists and was obviously angry, but it took only a few seconds to suppress it. But Tony Stark is also a man of faith, so let Phil Coulson ask. Mr. Tony Stark, how did you get from? Phil Coulson also started asking. Tony Stark also said everything that can be said, except that he made the arc reactor himself. The creation of the steel armor and escape from birth, and even the subsequent transformation have all been said. Because the Mark II he transformed has already made its debut in the world. After listening to Phil Coulson, he completely confirmed that the rumored Iron Man's armored man is after Tony Stark. He was also tactful and didn't say anything to make Tony Stark hand over this technology to the country. I see. As expected of Mr. Tony Stark, your mind is a huge amounts of treasure. Phil Coulson praised Tony Stark with direct admiration. Isn't it already recognized that I am a genius? Tony Stark responded to this compliment without any humility. Then can I ask, Mr. Tony Stark, what exactly do you want to do with the suit of armor you made? You saved some people in Gumera, Afghanistan, and you are going to clean up some troubles left by the weapons of Stark Industries? Or do you think you have the ability, so you want to help them? But Phil Coulson looked at Tony Stark's stinking response, and he didn't intend to criticize or quarrel on purpose, but confirmed Tony Stark's will. A superhero has to be kind. Tony Stark used to be a free-spirited playboy. Does such a person have a kind heart, and has great love and is willing to contribute to Blue Star? Phil Coulson can only put a question mark on this before he has a specific understanding. Have both. Hearing what Phil Coulson said, Tony Stark thought of Ethan, paused and said. Ethan gave his life to save him, and Gumera is Ethan's hometown. He can't bring Ethan back to life, but at least he must protect the peace of Gumera. Will you help other people in danger in the future? Phil Coulson heard both, his eyes lit up, and he asked again. I'm not sure, Gumera is home to a friend of mine, so that's why I want protection. As for the others, I have to wait until I meet them before I can get the answer. Tony Stark spread his hands out upon hearing this. Mr. Tony Stark, in fact, because of the existence of aliens. So the current situation of Blue Star is not optimistic. Phil Coulson heard the uncertain words, hesitated for a while, and decided to tell more information. I already know this. Doesn't the death god you mentioned come from some void? And when he talked to me a few words, he also talked about the universe. It is said that my technology is only powerful and advanced compared to human beings, but it is still too weak compared to the universe. Tony Stark waved his hands upon hearing this, and said with some dissatisfaction in his eyes. Since he took over the Stark industry, he has invented advanced technology for mankind time and time again. He has always been proud of it, but that death god actually said that his technology is still too rubbish. How could he be convinced? Mr. Tony Stark, don't you want to know why our bureau interviewed Mr. Death God? Before explaining this, there is one thing to explain to you. Aliens have visited Blue Star decades ago. At that time, a superhero with super ability appeared on the Blue Star, helping us humans successfully resist the alien attack. The time when aliens existed is unknown, but it is certain that their technology is more advanced and developed. Mastering technologies such as space jumps, space battleships, etc., these are currently unattainable for humans on our Blue Star. It was also at that time that my officer, Nick Fury, wanted to create Avengers to prevent the threat of aliens coming in the future. Phil Coulson heard Tony Stark's dissatisfaction, so he also wanted to win over and started explaining. You didn't look for a super ability user, but you came to me. It seems that your progress is not going well. After listening to this long speech, Tony Stark immediately caught the meaning of Phil Coulson's words. Yes, Blue Star did have super abilities in the past, which proves that there are other super abilities among humans. However, human beings are a xenophobic race, and they are also a race that fears that others will see them as aliens. People with super abilities are almost always hidden, making it difficult for people to detect and find them. You have also seen some rumors and records of Death God circulating on the dark web. Some of the tasks he has completed are beyond the scope of human ability. After investigation and discussion, we agreed that Mr. Death God is very likely to be a strong man with super abilities. Even if he is not a super ability user, his strength is far beyond ordinary people. So we made an appointment with him a few months ago. Until he appeared, we didn't know how long he had been here, let alone how he got here. In a sense, we found the right one. Mr. Death God is indeed a strong man whose strength cannot be judged. But it's a pity that he is not a blue star, but an alien. When Phil Coulson talked about these, his face was full of emotion and disappointment. He has followed Chief Fury for nearly 20 years, and Chief Fury became the director of the Bureau. His agent level has also been constantly improved during the past 20 years, and he is currently an agent with a higher status and authority in the Bureau. While performing missions and investigating various strange events, he was finally able to find a super ability user after decades. Naturally, Phil Coulson was also overjoyed, but what happened later can only be described as being as happy as he was disappointed. And they also learned that Odin, the God King and Legendary, may not have much lifespan. Blue Star may no longer have shelter if it has not found some powerful heroes to form Avengers and have some countermeasures. At that time, what the humans will face will most likely be slaughtered or even enslaved by aliens. Just the news that Odin might be dying soon, Chief Fury said not to spread it. Because if what Mr. Death God said is true, God King Odin and the Aesir Protoss have been protecting Blue Star. When the people of the Aesir Protoss actually came to Blue Star, they were talking about the lifespan of the God King Odin. Then even if the Aesir Protoss originally wanted to protect humans, they would have a grudge against them. Tony Stark saw that what Phil Coulson said was true, because the emotion and disappointment on Phil Coulson's face could not be faked. Then you all came to me because you thought I had a sudden burst of super ability, so I was able to escape from Afghanistan? It's just that after Tony Stark changed his position and substituted the meaning of Phil Coulson's words, he immediately understood. That's right, but I never thought, Mr. Tony Stark, relying on your clever mind, you could create a steel armor comparable to the latest fighter jets. Although you are not a super ability user, you are equivalent to a super ability user in my eyes. Phil Coulson didn't hide anything when he heard the words, and directly expressed his feelings and admiration. According to the course of action of your bureau, it is to investigate people who may have super abilities. So you were in contact with Harvey Ambaraka before, that is? Tony Stark accepted the sound of admiration and praise without feeling embarrassed at all, and immediately thought of something, and asked. That's right, we speculated earlier that Mr. Harvey Ambaraka might be a super ability user. Because he seems to be shrouded in luck, so even if his super ability may not be for combat, it may come in handy. Phil Coulson nodded when he heard the words, almost answering every question, because these are not top secret news. Then what's the result? When Tony Stark heard about Phil Coulson and that person from the National Land Bureau, he just thought that Harvey Ambaraka was pure luck just as he did before, and his eyes flashed. Based on the results of the two contacts, we judge that Harvey Ambaraka does not possess super abilities. Phil Coulson shook his head slightly when he heard the words, and said with some regret. No. This answer reminded Tony Stark of some words that Harvey Ambaraka had talked with himself on the balcony outside the ball. The calmness and indifference that Harvey Ambaraka talked about Obadiah Stannis unintentionally. It seems that Obadiah Stanislav is really as insignificant as garbage in the eyes of Harvey Ambaraka. It looked like Harvey Ambaraka had some sort of tie-in. But regardless of whether Harvey Ambaraka has super ability or not, in the end, Tony Stark Harvey Ambaraka obviously has no idea of joining the Avengers. I understand what you mean. Blue Star is in a critical moment. Your bureau wants to create Avengers to jointly resist alien invasions that may occur at any time in the future. But now that Stark Industries is in a transitional moment, I also have a lot of things to do on hand. So I have to think about joining the Avengers. However, if there are any major disasters and potential threats on Blue Star, you can contact me to see, maybe I will help you. Tony Stark thought about this, looked at Phil Coulson, and said. The appearance of that death god made Tony Stark believe that there are aliens in the universe, and those aliens have quietly come to Blue Star. That's why he needs to find a way to get the successful transformation of Stark Industry on the right track as soon as possible, so that he can devote himself to the research of steel armor. It's a pity that he doesn't know what kind of ability and strength Death God possesses, so he can't make specific battle armor. But since Death God is in Blue Star, there will definitely be a day when he will know, but I hope that day will not be too late. Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Tony Stark. Phil Coulson stood up when he heard Tony Stark's response. After thanking, Phil Coulson also took the initiative to say goodbye and leave. Phil Coulson was in a good mood, and although Tony Stark didn't join directly, he got a commitment. In the future, when a major disaster really occurs, there will be an opportunity to join forces, which proves that the contact he made during this trip is not bad in terms of results. Get off to a good start, and it won't be too long before they pull Tony Stark into the Avengers officially. Episode 21, You Are Harassment. Tony, what did you and Mr. Phil Coulson talk about? After Pepper saw Phil Coulson leaving on the first floor, he saw Tony walking directly to the basement, and asked curiously. It's nothing, I just talked about the current situation and future of Blue Star. Tony Stark also casually said something perfunctory when he heard the words, and went straight down in the elevator. Talking about things with Phil Coulson, even if he is a genius, he was able to accept it so quickly after seeing the Death God with his own eyes. If Pepper, a commoner, knew and believed it, he would have to waste a lot of words. Maybe after convincing Pepper, he will say that he doesn't want him to go to the battlefield, and so on. Although Tony Stark's words were perfunctory, they were undoubtedly the truth. The content of the conversation between the two can be summed up as centering around the future of Blue Star. It's just that Pepper couldn't be satisfied with Tony Stark's perfunctory attitude, so he took the initiative to follow up, wanting to ask Tony Stark a good question. Tony Stark already had a way of dealing with Pepper, so the two started bickering with each other. The other side, last night, Harvey Ambaraka reached out to him from Tony Stark. He already knew Tony Stark, had already solved Obadiah Stanislav, and the Iron King obviously couldn't get out. Because there is no Obadiah Stanis to snatch it, it is impossible for others to make the arc reactor in a short time. So the next period of time will be a time of calm. Definitely calm is only relative to Harvey, for others, New York has not been peaceful. Tony Stark couldn't settle down for a short time. With Tony Stark's character, as long as he knows that he can ask him to meet through the dark net, he will definitely contact him later. Now all he has to do is wait. As for why Harvey didn't answer Tony Stark's call last night, there was no significant reason and he wasn't busy. It's simply that Harvey doesn't want to see Tony Stark showing off to him. After all, although Tony Stark's temperament has changed a lot, he has become kind-hearted and willing to help the weak. But Tony Stark's ego and words and actions that don't take into account the feelings of others have not changed much. Harvey was wearing short-sleeved shorts and was playing games in front of the luxurious big screen in the lobby. He knew he would soon be entering his 22nd year in the Marvel Universe. In this world, Harvey doesn't have many friends to talk to. Because Asians were still orphans in the past, he was bullied and ignored because he was born in poverty. He doesn't think too much about things like friends, just don't bother him, just block his sight. This idea has a strong power in the awakening system. After Harvey's superficial identity is already the Diamond King in the eyes of countless people, Harvey doesn't want to make any friends anymore. If you need to deliberately cater to others to make friends with others, then he might as well not make friends. If we talk about Harvey's hobby of relaxing during the rare 2 days of rest in addition to the 5 days he must exercise in a week, then it is to find more delicious food or play games at home. All kinds of games. Harvey initially liked to play competitive games, such as racing, MOBA, FPS, and so on. However, with Harvey's physical fitness and senses, playing competitive games, he is always regarded as a cheating player every time, and is often reported and banned. Harvey was too lazy to call to argue with the official, so gradually Harvey stopped playing competitive games and turned to casual games. For example, those who keep pets and farm, this kind of game will be fine even if it is not online for a long time. Just in line with the way he rests from playing about a few hours a week. Feel free to spend some money, and from time to time, you can exchange ideas with people online, which is also a good way to relax. Harvey spent more than an hour after finishing some of the daily tasks in several games. After that, Harvey went out to find something to eat when he had nothing to do. With 5 meals a day, he would have more than 100,000 evolution points a day. If he specifically eats food made by some more powerful animals, he can get more evolution points. As for the wine, it won't bring him too many evolution points, it's just a drink. However, Harvey generally does not look for it specifically. After all, if he wants to evolve points, he has many ways to obtain a large number of evolution points, so he always comes in whatever mood he likes. If he is willing to be tough on himself, it is not impossible to evolve 100 times a week. Harvey drove the Maserati out this time, and while driving, he was thinking about when Tony Stark was holding some big dinner parties or exhibitions, so that he could go over and grab some food. In this way, the days passed day by day. A month passed in the blink of an eye. Tony Stark drove the iron armor and went to Afghanistan many times in a row to find 10 rings. After spending some time, Tony Stark finally wiped out all the 10 rings and freed Gamora from the purgatory on Earth. Throughout the Confederate States and America, rumors of Iron Man are being swirled. The people of Gamera regard Iron Man as a hero, but many people in America begin to doubt whether it is the technology produced by Stark Industries. Because at present, only Stark Industries in America has the possibility to produce such advanced technology. Faced with many doubts from the outside world, Tony Stark finally held a press conference and directly said that sentence in front of countless people in the world: "I am Iron Man." Iron Man's identity was confirmed, making countless people in America crazy. Then came the summoning of the National Council. "I want Tony Stark to hand over the core of this technology and contribute to the country." The average person might be intimidated by the Council of States, but who is Tony Stark? Before he changed his face, he was a well-known super genius and weapons dealer in the world, and he was also an honorable taxpayer. It was not so easy to suppress him with power. So Tony Stark refused in public and left directly. This move has made countless people in America admire Iron Man even more, and his reputation is even better than when he was a playboy. And that is on this day a month later. After Tony Stark rejected the Council of States question, he returned to the manor to have dinner, then came down from upstairs to his own laboratory and ordered casually, "JARVIS, contact Harvey Ambaraka." "Okay, sir." JARVIS was used to this, ever since Tony Stark was turned down the other day. Every day, Mr. Tony Stark puts him in touch with Mr. Harvey Ambaraka. "I thought this time it would be the same as usual, and I would be rejected in an instant, but this time it was connected." "Tony Stark, you have been calling every day for a month. Do you know that this is already harassment?" "My mobile phone and tablet, there are many other uses, rather than shutting down every day in order not to receive your call." And the first sentence greeted by the connection was Harvey's disdainful words. "JARVIS, am I harassment?" Hearing these words, Tony Stark stopped the action he was planning to work on, and asked belatedly, "In a sense, yes, sir." JARVIS paused for a moment, thinking about whether to answer truthfully, but finally chose a tactful answer. Episode 22, A Friend Who Can Understand. "You keep refusing to listen, what can I do?" Tony Stark also had some excuses when he heard the words, but he still said it firmly. "Forget it, what do you want from me?" Harvey saw that Tony was still talking hard and didn't bother to dwell on this question, so he asked directly. "It's rare to call you once, come to my house to have a chat. I have something I want you to see." Hearing this, Tony Stark immediately regained his spirits and sent out an invitation. He definitely wants to show Harvey Ambaraka his technological achievements. He most often used Mark II, but within a month, his mark had already been improved to Mark V instead of Mark II. But these things only he himself knows. Tony Stark thought of Harvey Ambaraka, and saw how other armors in his lab admired him. Just put a smile on Tony Stark's face. "Is there anything to eat?" Seeing that Tony Stark actually sent out an invitation, Harvey thought about it and asked back. "Food?" "Harvey Ambaraka, I rarely invite people to my home. I invited you over, but you actually asked me if I had anything to eat." Tony Stark, who was originally immersed in fantasy, was stunned for a moment when he heard this question, and said a little anxiously. But soon Tony Stark remembered a rumor circulating in New York's high society. Harvey Ambaraka's stomach is a bottomless pit, and this rumor appeared a month ago at Stark's charity ball. He also saw that Harvey Ambaraka was delicious. "Wait. I can get someone to do it." So Tony Stark also reacted and said, "You can ask someone to prepare a dinner for 100 people first, I will be there soon." Harvey immediately agreed upon hearing this. After the voice fell, Harvey hung up the phone, changed his clothes, and drove out. JARVIS, what did he just say? Tony Stark thought he had heard wrong, so he asked JARVIS. "Sir, you heard me right. Mr. Harvey Ambaraka said dinner for 100. JARVIS replied immediately after hearing the words. JARVIS helped me contact the chef of the 5-star hotel and let them prepare and deliver it as quickly as possible. Except for the price of the vegetables, I gave each of them $5,000 as a rush fee." Tony Stark said when he heard this. He didn't want to see Harvey Ambaraka come to his house and act like he didn't treat him well. "Okay, sir." JARVIS contacted immediately after hearing the words. In fact, Tony Stark wasn't just trying to show off to Harvey Ambaraka. There are still things he wants to chat with Harvey Ambaraka, such as his views on the Avengers. If you can even talk about aliens. Maybe Harvey Ambaraka already knows about aliens in the universe? Tony Stark can't be sure, but Tony Stark also left the laboratory directly and sat on the first floor. What happened? Pepper saw that not long after he went down to the laboratory, he immediately came up and sat on the sofa on the first floor, looking a little restless, and asked worriedly. "It's okay, just sit here." Tony Stark paused when he heard the words, and spoke. Jarvis? Upon hearing this answer, Pepper asked Jarvis directly. Sir is going to entertain a friend. Facing Pepper's inquiry, the voice of Jarvis sounded. What friend, just a guest? Upon hearing this, Tony Stark retorted directly. What friend? I do not know how. Seeing Tony's reaction, Pepper's curiosity was also aroused, and he continued to ask Jarvis. It's Mr. Harvey Ambaraka, and he's on his way now. Jarvis also answered honestly. Since when did they become friends? When Pepper heard the name, he glanced at Tony in surprise and said. She is not familiar with Harvey Ambaraka, but she is not unfamiliar, but she has never heard that Tony has such a deep friendship with Harvey Ambaraka. During this month. Jarvis replied again after hearing the words. Pepper didn't understand Jarvis's vague answer for a moment. You don't need to ask. In short, Harvey Ambaraka is going to come here as a guest. There will be a lot of food delivered later, please help to receive it later. Tony Stark interrupted Pepper's further curiosity and instructed directly. It's okay not to say that, but this made Pepper even more confused. Didn't they just have dinner not long ago? The food is for Mr. Harvey Ambaraka. His appetite seems to be good, so prepare more food. Seeing Pepper's puzzled look, Jarvis answered. The rumors are actually true? Pepper asked in surprise. Although I can't understand why humans can eat so much food, the rumors are indeed true. The king of big stomachs is not as good as him, right? Yes, none of the big eaters in the world has the appetite that Mr. Harvey Ambaraka has. Pepper and Jarvis asked and answered, and the two chatted directly. More than 20 minutes passed quickly. Sir, Mr. Harvey Ambaraka is at the gate of the estate. The door has been opened for it. The voice of Jarvis reported. Soon, the door of the villa opened automatically. For all this, Harvey was not surprised. When Pepper saw Harvey Ambaraka, who was wearing a white suit and was very handsome, he was dazzled for a while. What she often sees are all kinds of handsome white men, and it is relatively rare to see handsome Asian men. Although it's not the first time I've seen it, but I usually saw it from the side, and I knew there was no intersection, so I didn't pay too much attention. But this time the other party came to visit. Pepper was also fascinated for a while. Who doesn't like the young and handsome tender grass? Cough cough. At this time a cough came from the side, which brought Pepper back to his senses. Hello, Mr. Harvey Ambaraka. Pepper lowered her head, then looked up with a polite smile on her face. Hello, Miss Pepper Potts. Harvey responded politely when he heard the words. Go, let's chat below. Seeing Harvey Ambaraka approaching, Tony Stark stood up straight away and pointed behind him with his thumb. Harvey glanced at Pepper, thoughtfully, and nodded immediately. Pepper, there is no need to pour coffee for us without my instructions, and we will come up after we finish chatting in a while. When Tony Stark took Harvey Ambaraka to the bottom, he specifically warned. Seeing Tony's mysterious appearance, Pepper was also very curious, but he could only agree. Don't let her know. It seems that the latest technology you have developed is not the only thing you came to talk to me about. When Harvey walked up the stairs with Tony Stark, he spoke. It seems that I still can't hide it from you, but since you guessed what I'm going to talk about, you also know that she can't understand those things. You don't think she can't understand, but you think she understands, but can't understand you. Harvey glanced at where he was, curiously looked at Pepper who was here, and glanced at Tony Stark who seemed to have something on his mind. Not only her, but many people may not understand, so I brought you here. Hearing these meaningful words, Tony Stark sighed slightly and spoke. Then let me listen to you. Harvey paused for a moment, with a smile on his face, and said. Jarvis, the two of them do look like friends. Mr. is not good at expressing his feelings, but my judgment will not be wrong. Jarvis speaks with some pride. Although he didn't know much about Harvey Ambaraka, but he was able to make Mr. Harvey Ambaraka call him persistently for a month. There must be something in common with Mr. Tony Stark. The third one is delivered, continue to ask for tickets and follow up, this is really important to me. Episode 23, Tony's Light Bulb. Harvey followed Tony into Tony's underground research room. It is very advanced here, and some things that could only be displayed on the screen are presented here in the form of stereoscopic projection. Harvey had seen it in a movie in his previous life, but now he is really here, so he looked around with interest. Harvey Ambaraka, you give me the feeling that you know a lot of things. So have you ever heard of aliens? Tony noticed that Harvey Ambaraka wasn't looking surprised, just interested, so he asked as he walked over to a countertop. I know what I should know, what you want to talk about, just say it. Harvey's eyes flashed when he heard this, and he spoke. How much do you know about aliens? Tony Stark also asked directly when he heard Harvey Ambaraka's words. I know a little too much. For the sake of the feast, I can answer 3 questions for you. So it depends on what you want to learn from me. Harvey casually found a comfortable chair and sat down, said with a smile. Tony Stark saw Harvey Ambaraka, who smiled as if he knew everything. Sure enough, Harvey Ambaraka was very mysterious. Is Blue Star really in danger like Phil Coulson said? So Tony Stark thought for a while, and tentatively asked the question he most wanted to know at the moment. The current Blue Star is not dangerous at all, but it will become dangerous after a few years. Harvey said when he heard the words. How many years ago when was that? Tony Stark winced at the words. Does it really matter when, knowing that it's going to be dangerous in a few years? Harvey asked with a smile. Let me think about %. Hearing these words, Tony Stark instantly woke up from the anxiety in his heart. Tony Stark's brain began to think wildly. He doesn't know the origin of Harvey Ambaraka at the moment, but he somehow feels that what Harvey Ambaraka said is true. This is a rare opportunity to ask 3 times, and one has already been used up, letting him know that there will be great danger in the next few years. Then the second question, are there any aliens who can become our allies? If so, how can I get in touch with them? Tony Stark thought about it, and asked another question. There is an old saying in the Celestial Dynasty, people who are not of our race must have different hearts. Just because of the different races among human beings, wars have been constantly caused since ancient times. However, when do you think the majority of human beings unite and become allies? When Harvey heard the words, he didn't answer directly but asked rhetorically. When all have a common enemy? Tony Stark thought for a while after hearing this, and then understood. So before there is such a powerful enemy, the role of alliances and non-alignments is not great. You will understand this question after thinking about it yourself, so it is not an answer to your second question. So I can tell you when the danger to the universe will appear. If there is no accident at that time, it will be 9 years later, and you will unite by then. Harvey said when he heard the words. 9 years later? 2017? Who are you, Harvey Ambaraka? How do you know what's going on in the future? If there is such a strong enemy, why don't you feel scared and worried at all? Tony Stark heard Harvey Ambaraka mention the exact time, and also said that a powerful enemy who threatened the entire universe will appear at that time. As for who I am, this is beyond the scope of the answer. As for you asking me why I'm not afraid. Because fear can't solve anything, what should come will come. Harvey said with a smile while spreading his hands. Are you going to say he's afraid of Thanos? For now, Harvey must be afraid. But it is only for now, as long as he is allowed to evolve, he has nothing to be afraid of. If Thanos is about to show up at that time, if he is not sure to fight, at worst, he will go directly to other universes. As long as he gets more hero templates, won't he be able to run if he can't beat it? Definitely Harvey can also understand Tony Stark's current mood, and he must be full of mysteries, but this is exactly what Harvey wants. I've already answered your 2 questions, and you still have one last chance. You still have one last chance to ask questions. After that, you will have to see if I am in the mood to answer. Harvey sent a friendly reminder. He is not communicating with Tony Stark as Death God now, but as Harvey to make Tony Stark more curious about himself. So Harvey wouldn't mind giving Tony Stark some more information. Tony Stark is cursed with knowledge, the more he knows, the more he will act. Phil Coulson thinks you're a super ability who came to you. Hope you join the Avengers. Why didn't you join? Tony Stark thought about it and asked one last question. Are you sure the last question is asking this? Harvey asked in surprise when he heard the words. Just answer my question. Tony Stark knew he had learned enough information. As for whether what Harvey Ambaraka said is true or not, it only needs to be tested in the near future. Because the Avengers that Nick Fury wants to form may have good intentions, but things often don't work out of the original intention. In the end, it will definitely become a tool of politicians, and you need to look at the faces of politicians to act. And I don't want to be ordered to do something. It's up to me to do what I want, so I don't have an opt-in. After hearing the words, Harvey thought about it and answered. You can find a way to deal with the orders of the dignitaries. Tony Stark said when he heard this. Tony Stark, you don't have to try to win me over. Now you and I can sit here and have a friendly exchange, because there is no enmity or other complicated relationship between us. So don't try to do what you can't do, otherwise it will only lead to consequences you can't afford. Harvey took a deep look at Tony Stark and said calmly. Tony Stark belongs to the curse of knowledge, it is difficult to be understood by others. Therefore, Tony Stark's heart may not be as great as protecting Blue Star wholeheartedly, but he definitely has the desire to protect those around him. Because of this idea, Tony Stark will constantly think of ways to take various precautions. Even as a teammate of Tony Stark, as long as the strength is strong enough, it will be regarded as an object that needs to be guarded against in case of emergency. Now even if Tony Stark has not officially joined the Avengers. But Tony Stark now knows something about the future, if not with 100% certainty. Tony Stark has also begun to want to join forces with others to deal with the future, so at the moment wants to persuade him to join together. Maybe Tony Stark wants to find a friend to act with, so that he doesn't have to keep the secret in his heart all the time. It could also be that Tony Stark felt that it would be the best support if he could join him. Regardless of the reason, Harvey is unlikely to join the Avengers. Tony Stark looked at Harvey Ambaraka's eyes, and gradually returned to calm from the original smile, which made him feel a bone-chilling chill. I won't persuade you anymore, I was wrong, don't look at me with that look. So Tony Stark immediately gave up the idea of wooing, and apologized on his own initiative. After talking with Harvey Ambaraka just now, he realized that the mystery of Harvey Ambaraka may be far more than that. So he wanted to win over the other party to join his side, but now that he thought about it, his ideas were a little bit over the top. About the things I talked to you, whether it's aliens or the future, you can tell anyone you want. But don't expose me, I don't want my peaceful life to be disrupted now. Harvey saw that Tony Stark had confessed, so he didn't care about it any further, but gave a reminder. Even if you don't remind me, I won't tell people about these things casually. After all, even I currently find it difficult to accept that in only 9 years, there may be an unimaginable enemy. Now I feel more and more that knowing more is not a good thing. Tony Stark sighed, slumped on a chair, and spoke. He crafts a steel battle suit and stumbles upon an unknown creature, the Death God, that he doesn't understand. After getting to know him, he directly opened the door to a new world. The world he has come into contact with and the things he knows are unknown to countless people. The crisis will not come because you are worried, so you don't have to pay too much attention to it. And there are still 9 years, relying on your mind, 9 years should be able to create many miracles, right? Seeing Tony Stark like a salted fish without dreams, Harvey spoke. 9 years, if only I had that long life. It's okay if Harvey doesn't say it, but when it comes to 9 years, it makes Tony Stark even more depressed. You mean your light bulb, the things that tax your body? Harvey's eyes flashed when he heard this. He glanced at Tony Stark, and said. Bulb? You call the arc reactor a light bulb? Do you know what is the crystallization of technology and wisdom? Tony Stark was a little frustrated at first, but when the word light bulb came out, he stood up instantly, wanting to argue with reason. Today's 2 changes, 6,000 words are sent, episode 24, treating Tony. Aside from its function, is its appearance really far from that of a light bulb? Harvey said with a smile when he saw Tony Stark looking anxious to jump. It's a good one, let's not talk about function. Tony Stark laughed angrily when he heard Harvey's attitude of putting aside the facts. He wanted to talk to Harvey about the ability of the arc reactor. But soon, he also realized that Harvey Ambaraka just used this kind of words on purpose to make himself less negative. Although your words are not very nice, thank you anyway. So Tony Stark, who realized it, also thanked him. And you're right, this arc reactor has put some burden on my body. I tried changing some elements, but I haven't found a replacement element yet. Immediately, Tony Stark opened the clothes on his chest, exposing the arc reactor on his chest to the air, and said with some helplessness on his face. Although the palladium element has not caused any problems in his body, it will not affect his body. But he himself knew that if he continued to use the current arc reactor, he would be killed by palladium poisoning in a short time. In addition to finding replacement elements, there is a way to restore your body to normal and prolong your lifespan. Harvey's heart moved when he heard this, and he spoke. If you said that taking out the shrapnel from the heart and not using the steel armor in the future, then you don't need to say it. Knowing that there is an external threat, without the steel armor, I am no less than sitting on the ground waiting to die. Tony Stark waved his hand upon hearing this, and said directly. If Rhodes had promised himself to be the driver of the iron armor before, so that he hadn't tried the power and feeling brought by driving the iron armor, then even if no one else explained, he would find a reliable doctor to perform surgery on him to remove the shrapnel. But he has already experienced the steel armor, and he also knows that there will be many dangers in the future of Blue Star. How could he be willing to be a common man, even if the common man is rich? But Tony Stark knows that when the real crisis comes, money is not everything. It's definitely impossible for me to say such low-level things as persuading you to undergo surgery and stop using steel armor. But if you don't want to hear it, just pretend I didn't say it. Harvey didn't want to say anything when he heard the words. It's not surgery, what's the method? Upon hearing this, Tony Stark looked at Harvey Ambaraka with a puzzled look on his face. Let's talk about your masterpiece, the steel armor. The original intention of you calling me here should be to show me your scientific and technological achievements. Harvey ignored Tony Stark's question when he heard the words, and came to a pair of battle armor with great interest. Tony Stark felt a little regretful when he saw that Harvey Ambaraka didn't want to talk about that matter. Harvey Ambaraka is extremely mysterious, and he seems to know countless things. Since he said there is a way, it must not be common. Just now, I was self-righteous and missed the opportunity to know. Let's not talk about battle armor, how about we continue talking about the topic just now? Tony Stark struggled internally, and wanted to bring the topic back to how to solve the palladium element that poisoned him, with some discussions and requests in his tone. Forget it, help you this time, reach out your hand. Hearing this, Harvey turned around and glanced at Tony Stark, pretended to ponder for a moment, and said, "Does this have anything to do with solving my physical problems?" Tony Stark stretched out his hand upon hearing this, and asked. "According to my estimate, you will be unconscious for a minute or two, and you will be fine soon." Harvey held Tony Stark's hand with his left hand as a reminder. Tony Stark would be unconscious for a minute or two when he heard it. Before he could react and say something, his eyes went dark, and he lost consciousness instantly. Then, Harvey passed some life energy from his left hand to maintain Tony Stark's vital signs. At the same time, Harvey's index finger slightly slashed open the skin on Tony Stark's chest. Tony Stark's heart was exposed, and ordinary people would feel uncomfortable seeing the living heart and other internal organs suddenly. However, when Harvey saw this bloody scene, his eyes did not change, but he concentrated. The veins in Tony Stark's body wrapped everything else, and it was crystal clear to his eyes. The power of the void condensed on Harvey's right hand glowed purple, turning into countless threads as thin as silk, penetrating into Tony Stark's body, and taking out the remaining shrapnel. Afterwards, under the infusion of life energy given by Harvey, some minor injuries in Tony Stark's body were still scratched wounds on the body surface, and they recovered at a speed visible to the naked eye. Harvey put Tony Stark flat on the ground, and the shrapnel taken out of his body was directly placed on the table beside him, ripping open the chest to remove the shrapnel and heal, all in the span of 10 seconds. And with the infusion of life energy, it took less than 2 minutes for Tony Stark to wake up. Tony Stark felt that his eyes were darkened, and when he opened his eyes again, what he saw was the ceiling. Tony Stark got up immediately, and strangely, he stood up easily without much effort. Moreover, his eyesight seemed to have improved. Not only that, the faint stabbing pain in his chest and his head, which had always caused him some headaches, were now extremely sober and relaxed. Let Tony Stark feel his body, as if he was completely healed. Tony Stark is not considered young now, he is already 38 years old, and there is nothing wrong with his body. But as we grow older, various senses and functions of the body will naturally decline. For example, a certain part of the body will feel more sour, which is a minor problem. But now the slight soreness that I felt for a long time has completely disappeared. What is the principle? Tony Stark looked at Harvey Ambaraka and asked incomprehensibly. You don't have to worry about the reason. I took out the shrapnel in your body for you, and I have completely removed the palladium poisoning in your body. It can give you more time to find alternative elements. Harvey had no intention of explaining what he said, but simply answered what he had done. He has the ability to absorb the life energy of living things and heal himself. Naturally, life energy can also be separated to achieve the ability to heal others. To win over Tony Stark's faith void, there are several steps. But the first and most important step is to make Tony Stark feel his body being healed, rejuvenated, and strengthened. No one can resist life extension, to feel younger and even stronger in the body. As long as Tony Stark experiences this feeling, then even if Tony Stark gets his father's notes and creates new elements from them, he won't be trapped by palladium poisoning in the future, and Tony Stark will never forget how he feels now. Therefore, whenever the time came, Tony Stark would take the initiative to ask Harvey without deliberately persuading him, so as to gain the opportunity to strengthen his body. At that time, when he formally explained to Tony Stark, it would easily arouse Tony Stark's desire, and he would naturally believe in the void and join the void. Tony Stark heard that the palladium element had completely disappeared, and quickly ran to the side table to open the box, and took out the tester for the palladium element. After testing it, I found that the trace amount of palladium in my body had completely disappeared. It made Tony Stark look incredible. Immediately, Tony Stark smelled some blood. Following the smell, Tony Stark found that on the table 10 meters away, there were some small shrapnel that looked a little black with blood. Tony Stark closed his eyes and felt for a while, and found that there was really no strange feeling coming from his chest. Mirror. Tony Stark came to a screen and yelled. JARVIS directly turned the display into a mirror, reflecting Tony Stark's current appearance. Tony Stark pulled his clothes back and looked at his chest. At the moment, there was still a little blood on his chest, but he didn't see any wounds. JARVIS, how long have I been unconscious? After seeing this scene, Tony Stark asked. Sir, you were unconscious for a total of 72 seconds. JARVIS has been watching this side, and answered the question directly. Harvey Ambaraka, is this your super ability? Tony Stark looked at Harvey Ambaraka, who was 10 meters away, and asked in disbelief. That's just a small trick, but according to your knowledge, you can use super ability to understand it. Harvey nodded lightly when he heard the words, and said, "If there is a battle in the future, and someone on our side is injured, you can help treat it, won't it be invincible?" Tony Stark was extremely excited at the moment when he heard these words. He strode quickly to Harvey, and said with great anticipation, "Tony Stark, I know you're excited right now. But don't forget what I just told you." Harvey knew that Tony Stark would be excited, but he didn't expect to directly make Tony Stark excited like this, reminded. Hearing this reminder, Tony Stark's originally excited head calmed down a lot in an instant. "Harvey Ambaraka, I don't even know how to repay you." Tony Stark held Harvey's hand and said very seriously. He originally just wanted to find Harvey Ambaraka to inquire about information, and to show off his achievements to Harvey Ambaraka. But tonight's experience made him understand too many things, and his body was actually healed by Harvey Ambaraka. "I just bought shares in Stark Industries not long ago. I'm counting on you to get Stark Industries up. If you, the chairman, die and cause the stock to plummet, I will lose a lot. So it's just helping you casually, it's not a kindness," Harvey said with some jokes when he heard the words. It is definitely impossible for him to directly propose how to ask Tony Stark to repay him. Compared with directly asking for something, favors and kindness are often more difficult to repay. But Tony Stark heard these words and wanted to say something. "Okay, don't talk about it anymore, just remember not to expose my name. And I came because you said you have food here. It's been so long, where's my dinner?" Harvey interrupted what Tony Stark wanted to say and changed the subject directly. "JARVIS?" Seeing that Harvey didn't want to continue talking about this topic, Tony Stark asked along the way. "Dinner is ready to be placed on the second floor. It's just that you have a hot chat, sir, so I didn't bother you." JARVIS heard it and responded immediately. "Then go up and eat." Tony Stark looked at Harvey and said. Harvey nodded and walked up with Tony Stark. Episode 25, Destruction of Records. "You shouldn't be going back so soon, right? I haven't shown you my steel armor yet." As Tony was walking, he suddenly remembered and said. "It's a rough night in New York, but Harvey Ambaraka should have nothing to fear." So he directly made a retainer, wanting Harvey Ambaraka to stay here for a while. "Then you have to prepare a supper for 100 people for me." Harvey didn't refuse when he heard the words, but just expressed his request to stay here longer. "Didn't you just have dinner? Do you want some supper? Or is this some price brought on by that?" Tony Stark asked when he heard that Harvey hadn't eaten dinner yet, thinking about supper. "That's right." Harvey nodded slightly. Harvey can't guarantee what changes will happen when Tony Stark joins the Void in the future. But Tony Stark's appetite in the future will definitely not be bad, so explain in advance to leave a little impression on Tony Stark. It can also make Tony Stark accept it better when the time comes. "What did you two talk about?" Seeing Tony and Harvey Ambaraka walking up, Pepper asked curiously. "Let's talk about the future of Blue Star, as well as my scientific and technological achievements," Tony questioned casually. This excuse again. Pepper was speechless when he heard the familiar words. "I didn't lie to you, I really talked about the future of Blue Star." Tony paused and said seriously. I know, the topics between you are nothing more than those kinds of topics. Beauty, fine wine, sports car, technology, future." Pepper rolled his eyes when he heard the words, and said. "Correction, not just chat. In our capacity, this kind of talk is not a chat, but we can really participate in change." Tony corrected him earnestly. Just as Tony was arguing with Pepper, Harvey had already come to the dining table and started eating directly. When Tony Stark and Pepper were chatting, they noticed that Harvey Ambaraka was eating dishes in front of him at an extremely fast speed and constantly in his mouth in an elegant way. "I've heard the rumors, but when I saw it with my own eyes, I still couldn't believe it." Pepper saw that the dishes were piled up crazily, but Harvey's eating speed did not slow down at all, and he was a little shocked. "Although I can't believe it, this is the truth." Tony touched his chest upon hearing this, and said. "Well, but Tony, how do I get the feeling that you've gotten a lot younger?" Pepper nodded, then looked at Tony and asked. "It should be because I'm in a good mood right now?" Tony didn't care when he heard the words, and said casually. The shrapnel in his body was directly removed, and the palladium poisoning in his body was also directly removed. Although as long as he continues to use the arc reactor and drive the iron armor, he will continue to be poisoned with palladium over time. However, with Harvey Amber stuck around, he didn't have to refuse the poisoning problem. It can be said that he has no worries at all. Harvey heard this, glanced at Tony Stark, and said nothing. "No, the wrinkles on your face are gone, you can see for yourself." Upon hearing this, Pepper brought a mirror, handed it to Tony Stark, and said. Tony Stark looked at himself in the mirror, as if he was a few years younger, and his appearance changed to be the same as when he was just 30 years old. "Have you developed any new technology?" Pepper looked at Tony and asked very seriously. Tony is 38 years old, he is not young anymore. Although his hair is not gray, there are naturally some wrinkles on his face. But now Tony looks like he is a few years younger, and his skin looks more delicate and handsome. Knowing how to keep one's appearance young is a problem that every adult woman will worry about. Pepper is also a woman and definitely wants to know how this is done. Definitely Pepper's first suspicion is that Tony Stark has developed some new technologies. After all, this is Tony's strong point. I'm not genetics or pharmacy, how can I develop a medicine to maintain youth or even return to youth? Tony Stark shook his head upon hearing this, and said directly. Then why are the wrinkles on your face gone? Pepper heard the words and looked at Tony, wanting to know the real situation very much. I do not know either. Tony Stark also shook his head in confusion when he heard the words, with a look that I don't know either. Immediately, Tony Stark glanced at Harvey Ambaraka, who was frantically destroying food. Although I don't know what Harvey Ambaraka did, but some changes in his body must be related to Harvey Ambaraka. I have some things to go down first. Pepper, don't come down, I will tell you what I need to tell you. When you don't want to tell you, don't inquire, casually. Immediately, Tony thought of something, instructed Pepper, and went to the basement research room. Before going down, Tony stood at the foot of the stairs and took a look at Harvey Ambaraka. He was relieved to find that Harvey Ambaraka hadn't cared about his actions. Seeing that Tony was about to go down again, Pepper told himself not to follow him, acting like he was going his own way, and he was also a little depressed. Tony Stark had just entered his underground research room. JARVIS, scan my body. And compare it to my previous body. Tony Stark instructed immediately. When JARVIS heard a red light indicating, it scanned directly. Sir, it has been detected that the cell activity in your body has been strengthened, making your body stronger. And there are no diseases bothering you at present, and you are 6 years younger than your body yesterday. According to cells, you are now the same as you were when you were 32 years old. It's like being rejuvenated. After JARVIS scanned it, it released 2 stereoscopic projections to explain the situation. Rejuvenation? Harvey Ambaraka, what the hell did you do to me? Tony Stark looked at himself in the stereoscopic projection, and the appearance model also looked younger. Hearing these words, at the moment he really realized the changes in his body. Harvey Ambaraka not only helped him remove the shrapnel and cleared the palladium accumulated in his body, but also made himself younger. Tony Stark knows that lifespan and genes are something humans have been studying for a long time. It's just been so long, and there are still many diseases that humans cannot cope with and treat, let alone the research of effective medicines and methods to prolong human life. But now Harvey Ambaraka not only directly cured the disease in his body, but also strengthened his cells and rejuvenated him? What kind of super ability is this is completely beyond Tony Stark's cognition. If Harvey Ambaraka spreads this method of rejuvenation, even if he needs to pay sky-high money, it is unknown how many rich people want to rejuvenate. This kindness is much greater than he imagined. Sir, it is difficult for me to explain this to you. Perhaps it will be easier for you to see it yourself. JARVIS heard Tony's words, and directly released a video projection. Tony looked at the projection, and he noticed that the time marked under the image was not long, only about a minute. After Tony saw himself shaking Harvey Ambaraka's hand, he fell into a coma. Immediately, Tony saw his chest being cut open by Harvey Ambaraka's fingers. Harvey Ambaraka's fingers, which seemed to have nothing or even ordinary fingers, turned into extremely sharp scalpels at that moment. It cut open his skin directly, and then Harvey Ambaraka's hand released a lot of purple thread-like things, which penetrated directly from his chest into his heart. Purple's thread accurately and quickly removed the shrapnel from his body. In less than 10 seconds, his skin healed at a speed visible to the naked eye. After all this was done, Harvey Ambaraka stood aside. Harvey Ambaraka seemed to think about it, and then laid his body flat on the ground. The end of the video was until he woke up. After watching it, Tony Stark couldn't help but dragged his chin. Is this just a small trick? Tony Stark murmured in disbelief as he recalled every word he had spoken to Harvey Ambaraka in his mind. Just the unknown healing ability displayed by Harvey Ambaraka, as well as the sharp hands like blades, are already extraordinary. And that may just be the tip of the iceberg for Harvey Ambaraka. How much ability Harvey Ambaraka can show, Tony Stark can't even imagine it now. Although he is a super genius, his vision is still limited to the known range of human beings, and super ability is a field he has never understood. JARVIS with this video record, the video of my chat with Harvey Ambaraka tonight is destroyed. After a while, Tony Stark calmed down and gave instructions. Sir, this is extremely valuable information. Are you sure you want to destroy it? Instead of storing it in a private server? Upon hearing this instruction, JARVIS issued an inquiry. Although it is artificial intelligence, it also knows that what we are talking about tonight is an invaluable image. Destroy, don't leave any records. Otherwise, if what happened tonight is accidentally spread, it will only bring about unforeseen disasters. Tony heard the words and said seriously. Although Tony is very confident in his technology, he cannot guarantee that his server and system will not be hacked. If someone is hacked and sees this tonight's video, it will not only cause trouble for Harvey Ambaraka, but also make him a sinner who killed other people. Okay, it's being destroyed. JARVIS immediately started destroying after hearing the instructions. This is the first update. Episode 26, Human Nature. After Tony Stark saw that the progress bar of image destruction was full, he put his hands on the table, feeling relieved. The back was covered with cold sweat at some point, but Tony Stark knew why. When people see beautiful things or abilities that are mysterious but contain infinite possibilities, they will feel curious and excited. So Harvey Ambaraka cured him, and he was naturally excited when he got better. And thinking of the enemies that may appear in the future, he thinks this is a very invincible super ability. Because as long as Harvey Amber is stuck, they don't need to be too afraid of getting hurt, as long as they don't die. But when people really encounter the unrecognizable and incomprehensible mystery, but can realize the danger brought by this mystery, the first reaction is no longer excitement and curiosity, but the overwhelming fear that comes from biological instinct. After Tony Stark witnessed the process of Harvey Ambaraka healing himself, fear was derived. Harvey Ambaraka has the news of this healing ability, if it is exposed. I don't know how many people want to find Harvey Ambaraka, in order to treat diseases that cannot be cured by current technology, and to prolong their lifespan. But in the video just now, Harvey Ambaraka not only showed the ability to heal. There is also the purple energy that does not know the specific function but is directed like an arm, and Harvey's fingers are as sharp as a blade. Obviously Harvey Ambaraka still has the ability to protect himself, otherwise it would be absolutely impossible to treat him at the risk of exposure and let him know about these things. Did you destroy the image? At this time, Harvey's voice sounded from behind Tony Stark. I saw that video, and I can't do without destroying it. Upon hearing these words, Tony Stark turned around, looked at Harvey who was walking into the underground research room, and said with a wry smile. I know you might be afraid of me, but don't worry, if I'm your enemy, I won't help you. Harvey said calmly. Then why are you approaching me? Tony Stark asked after hearing these words. Tony Stark, before you said this, didn't you think you had no brains? Forgot that you contacted me for a month? Harvey said a little speechlessly after hearing the words. Although he intended to impress Tony Stark, it was convenient to lure Tony Stark into the void later. But he didn't expect that Tony Stark would keep contacting him constantly as if possessed. So in order not to annoy him with Tony Stark, Harvey connected to see what the hell Tony Stark was up to. Tony Stark wanted to refute when he heard the swearing, but after thinking about it, he had indeed contacted him, so he had nothing to refute for a while. My actions are all based on my mood, and you don't have to be too entangled. Tell me about your technology. Harvey saw that Tony Stark wanted to argue with him, but couldn't say anything, so he let Tony Stark go and talked about the battle armor. The latest ones I'm developing are Mark IV and Mark V. One focuses on combat, and the other focuses on portable and portable. These are all my wisdom crystallization, and the flight speed at full speed at high altitude can reach up to Mach 2. The materials used to make it are hard and cold-resistant materials for aerospace satellites. They are not afraid of firearms and bullets, and there are also moves such as palm blasters. Tony Stark also became interested when he heard the words, and immediately came to the front of the two armors, proudly introducing them. In just over a month, you improved the armor to make them perform like this. Sounds good. Your battle armor should be even more powerful in the future. But this also means that no matter how you improve, your armor's biggest weakness lies in yourself. Don't say I didn't remind you, in the battle with the enemy, if you have a weakness that can't be solved but is easy to find, you can easily die. Harvey heard that he tapped the battle armor lightly with his right hand, and there was a clanging sound. I've thought about this weakness too, but I can't change it now. Because no matter how good my head is, I'm still a human being who will age, get hurt, and die. When Tony Stark heard what Harvey Ambaraka said, he didn't deny it, and admitted the shortcoming. There is not much difference in combat between driving a steel armor and flying a fighter, except that his technology is stronger. Once the armor or fighter jet you are driving is damaged, you will be exposed to the danger of combat. There is a possibility of death at any time, so at first his idea was to find Colonel Rhodes to cooperate with him. He has an extremely intelligent head, and Rhodes has extremely rich combat experience, and the combination of the two can better exert the power of the steel armor. It's just that Rhodes didn't want to understand and gave him a face, so he became the driver himself. The words just now were naturally what Harvey said deliberately to remind Tony Stark of his fragility. Just now? So that means you have a solution? Now Harvey heard these words, glanced at Tony Stark, and spoke. I want to strengthen my body, so as to improve the biggest weakness of the armor, which is the research and development of genetics. However, in the development of a genetic medicine that has no side effects and is suitable for the human body, the experimental process must be contrary to human ethics. That's why I never set foot in the field of genetics. Tony Stark also expressed some of his thoughts after hearing the words. Tony Stark, how do you think humans can be called human? When Harvey heard Tony's words, his eyes flashed, and he asked. Maybe some people have powers different from human beings, but they want to suppress themselves and integrate into human beings, hoping not to be regarded as aliens but to be called human beings. But to put it bluntly, even if there is no super ability among human beings, there are differences between people, such as wealth and power. Relying on a little bit of power in their hands, there are countless people who want to take advantage of the advantages and wealth. Human nature is selfish and greedy. As long as people have the opportunity, they will naturally want to get more and control more. And when you have this opportunity, if you don't grasp and use it well, you will deliberately suppress yourself to cater to the weak, hoping to be regarded as a common person. To Harvey, this kind of thinking is just stupid and banal thinking. Although he had the power of the void for nearly 3 years without really thinking about it, it was finally reminded by Nick Fury. After letting him think for a while, when he realized that his power came from the void, he accepted his current self. Things to desire? Do you mean male or female? Tony Stark asked, wanting to know what kind of question Harvey was referring to. I'm asking questions that aren't male or female, but what humans inherently desire. Harvey turned around upon hearing that, looked Tony Stark in the eyes, and said with a smile. The essence of human beings cannot be reduced to one kind, because different people have very different desires and needs. Hearing this, Tony Stark pondered for a moment before speaking. Human beings are arrogant, inferior, kind, and selfish, but that's not the nature of people's different personalities. The essence of human beings is the desire to survive. In order to survive, human beings will long for power, and rely on power to get more things they want. Profound knowledge, powerful military force, high and powerful status, and even countless different talents, as long as they are different from others, they are strength. Since ancient times, the history of the world has always been dominated by men, but there have also been cases where women have reached the highest positions. This means that women also desire power, but it is more difficult for women to obtain power, so it has rarely appeared since ancient times. However, as long as a person has a slightly superior or superior status than other people, people will make a distinction between intentional and unintentional for themselves. I disdain to be with people who are far inferior to me, and even contact may be ashamed of it. This kind of example can be seen everywhere in history, even you and me are no exception. Now do you still think that the essence of human beings needs to be specifically divided into men and women? Harvey said slowly, while looking at the steel armor. Tony Stark wanted to refute, but after thinking about it carefully, he didn't know where to refute. It is true that people have different personalities, but the essence is to survive. After you can survive, you will desire more things. Such as superior living conditions, superior status, and all kinds of things. You mean to call me unreasonable? However, considering Harvey Ambaraka was talking to Tony Stark about this, he realized something after thinking about it, and said with some emotion. I didn't say that, I just reminded you of the nature of human beings. As for what you think, I don't know. Although the essence of human beings is to survive and gain more power. But when you want more power, ask yourself if you're really ready. If you're not mentally prepared, it's not a bad thing to play it safe. Harvey's words were like a bewitching voice, subtly shaking some of Tony Stark's inherent concepts. There may not be any immediate results now, but when Tony Stark desires more power and overcomes his current greatest weakness, then this wavering will affect some decisions and actions made by Tony Stark. I have already eaten your dinner just now, so I won't eat here for supper. I will help you get rid of palladium poisoning. Although I did it casually, it doesn't mean that when you get palladium poisoning again in the future, I will help you get rid of it. So don't take chances, take advantage of the extended time now, and try to find new elements to replace palladium to solve the fundamental problem of palladium poisoning. Harvey looked at the pensive Tony Stark, said a few words, then turned and left. Only Tony Stark was left alone in the underground research room, his eyes flickering constantly, and his brain was constantly turning. Episode 27, Tony's Thoughts. Mr. Harvey Ambaraka, where's Tony? Pepper saw Harvey coming up from the underground research room and asked. He should come up by himself in a while, or you can go down and find him. I've already finished my dinner, so I'm leaving first. Harvey smiled and said. Are you leaving? That's right, it's getting late. You seem to have a good chat with Tony. I hope that Mr. Harvey Ambaraka will be your guest next time. Pepper was a little surprised when he heard this, but he glanced at the clock on the wall and found that it was already past 9 o'clock in the evening. An hour or so more and New York will be less peaceful, so it's only natural for Harvey Ambaraka to leave now. Well, if there is a chance next time. Goodbye, then, Miss Pepper. Harvey nodded slightly when he heard the words, said goodbye, and went out. After Harvey left, Pepper asked directly in the lobby on the first floor. JARVIS, is Tony okay? Can I go down now? It's all right, sir, he's thinking about something right now. It is not recommended to go down and disturb. When the master thinks clearly, he will come up directly. JARVIS also gave suggestions after hearing the words. All right. Pepper was only a little worried about Tony at first, but now that he heard no suggestion, he suppressed the idea of going down to take a look. And Tony Stark, who is in the underground research room, is also thinking constantly in his heart at the moment. According to his wisdom, even if he started to study genetics now, it would not be difficult to develop a medicine that would strengthen his body's ability, it would just take some time. It's just that he thought about doing some horrible things before, so he never thought about it. But now hearing what Harvey Ambaraka said, his original firm belief was shaken a little. JARVIS, after listening to my chat with him, what do you think? After hesitation, Tony Stark began to consult other people's opinions. Sir, I don't quite understand what a human being is, because I'm just an AI intelligence. But to sum up what you said, it can be roughly divided into 3 points. The first point is that the steel armor is very powerful, but there is an unavoidable and difficult to change weakness, and that is you originally, sir. The second point is that you have the ability and the confidence to solve this weakness, but you can't transcend human ethics, so you have never touched the genetics that can solve the weakness. The third point is Mr. Harvey Ambaraka's words, telling you. If, sir, you want to make a change, have you figured out whether it is necessary to make that step? If you want to do that, are you mentally prepared? According to my observation, sir, you obviously haven't fully considered these premises. So I suggest that you first focus on finding new elements to replace palladium. If you can't guarantee that there will be no side effects when you drive the armor, then you don't need to think about overcoming the fatal weakness of the iron armor. You can't think of the answer right now, but you may have made a choice by then. JARVIS also responded when he heard Tony's question. Thanks, JARVIS. Tony was stunned for a moment when he heard JARVIS's words, and suddenly felt his thoughts brighten up, and thanked him. Harvey Ambaraka is a superpower, and he is a super genius with a good mind, but because of the different surfaces they come into contact with, their visions are completely different. Only by ensuring that he can drive the iron armor can he continue to understand and get in touch with the world that he just stepped into, which is completely different from ordinary people. Only by deepening his understanding can he continue to talk freely about his own ideas and ideas with Harvey Ambaraka. It may also be that Harvey Ambaraka feels that the steel armor he developed has begun to come into contact with Harvey Ambaraka's world. That's why the other party chatted with me so much, which expanded his knowledge a lot. But also because of this, a question was born in Tony Stark's heart, that is, how old is Harvey Ambaraka? Harvey Ambaraka has an ability similar to rejuvenation, so the identity he investigated may only be what Harvey Ambaraka wants others to see. Where's Harvey Ambaraka? Thinking of this, Tony Stark glanced around and found that Harvey Ambaraka was gone, and asked immediately. Mr. Harvey Ambaraka has left. Before he left, he specifically reminded you that he doesn't always help you treat palladium poisoning before leaving. So you have to quickly find new elements to replace palladium. Because you were thinking just now, you probably didn't hear it. According to my feeling, what Mr. Harvey Ambaraka said just now meant that he must either find new elements or give up driving the iron armor. Next time you are poisoned and can't find a solution, you will die. JARVIS heard what Harvey said just now. Before I knew I was getting younger, I thought about my palladium poisoning and asked Harvey Ambaraka for help. But after knowing that I was getting younger, I didn't think about it that much. Tony Stark had a smile on his face when he heard the news. One is to help heal, and the other is to help heal and make him younger at the same time. This is a completely different difference. Now he is 6 years younger, and his body is about the same as when he was 32 years old, but he is also middle-aged after 32 years old. This time the wrinkles are gone, and he looks younger. Others will only think that he is well-maintained or has undergone some surgery. But if he was a few years younger and turned back to his 20s, then no matter how he explained, others would think there was something wrong with him. Not to mention that this may expose Harvey Ambaraka's super ability, and he himself may be tied up as a guinea pig. Although he has a steel armor, he is not invincible. If he is targeted by the military, he does not have the full confidence to guarantee his safety. So Tony Stark fully understands Harvey Ambaraka's reluctance to help himself with too many words. Afterwards, Tony Stark left the underground research room. Facing Pepper's various curious questions, Tony Stark explained a few words, while others were perfunctory. Among them, what Pepper is most curious about is that he has become younger, and Tony Stark can only insist that he does not know about this. This made Pepper a little disappointed. After all, There is no woman who does not love beauty and does not want to become younger. It's just that Tony Stark really doesn't seem to know. So Pepper thought about it for a while, and he could only use Tony because he met a friend he could talk to, which made him feel better and made him look younger for the time being. Episode 28, New Year's Invitation. Harvey drove back home and ordered a bunch of takeaways for them to deliver to his manor. Now that he had done what he had to do, all he had to do was wait for Tony Stark to deliver it himself. Except for Tony Stark, there are not many people who can win over at this stage and whose fate is strong enough. If the Green Titan Bruce Banner is recruited, it should be able to bring him a lot of void energy. It's just that Bruce Banner is still hiding from XC, not daring to face the power of the Green Titan in his body. Possessing great power does not want to control it, but wants to destroy the power in the body. He'd make Bruce Banner realize how banal the idea was, but it wasn't time to find a Green Titan. Abomination is a good target. Its potential and strength are not as good as the Green Titan, but it is still quite strong. It's just that Harvey didn't know where the abomination was locked up, so he couldn't find it. Asking General Ross directly might yield an answer, but he can't be too high profile right now. In 9 years, before the purple sweet potato essence came, as long as he evolved more than 1,000 times and got other hero templates, he could directly face Thanos' hard steel. And after he gets the hero template of Voidwalker Kassadin, his scope of activities will not be limited to Blue Star. Instead, he would be free from various planets. At that time, he would not only be able to establish the Void God cult, but there would be all kinds of monsters in the universe that he could hunt and kill. Absorbing the life energy of those monsters, there must be more evolution points for him to evolve. By then, he may have evolved far less than 1,000 times. If he can get the hero origin of the Death Omen Void Reaver, then combine it with other hero templates. Harvey is confident that even if he can't do anything to the Celestials, he absolutely doesn't need to worry about the threat of death from the Celestials. It is now 2008, and there are still 2 months to prepare for 2009. The time when various superhero blowouts broke out was after the 2012 New York War. And his evolution efficiency and the speed of obtaining void energy will not become slower because of more times. Instead, it will become faster and faster because the more times he evolves, the stronger his strength becomes. Thinking of this, Harvey played the game with a smile on his face. After Harvey treated Tony and guided a bit, Tony Stark stopped harassing Harvey for the time being without his daily life-threatening serial deduction. Tony Stark handed over the company to Pepper to take care of, except for some important matters requiring his signature. The rest of the time was devoted to research. Because of the conversation with Harvey Ambaraka, he saw a wider world. And Tony Stark's body is younger and more energetic now, which leads to a great increase in the speed of research and development. Mark's model not only stopped at the 4th and 5th generations, but also directly evolved to the 17th generation of Mark in just 2 months, and its performance was greatly enhanced. And because the shrapnel in Tony Stark's body disappears, he doesn't need to wear the arc reactor all the time. It only needs to be worn when testing the new steel armor, so the speed of palladium poisoning in Tony Stark's body has been greatly slowed down. This also leads to Tony Stark, who simply doesn't have a decadent period of imminent death. 2 months have passed unknowingly, the new year in America has arrived, and the whole country is in a festive atmosphere. Tony Stark also contacted Harvey directly on this day, wanting to celebrate the new year with this person who has a lot of kindness to him and is considered a friend. Sir, Mr. Harvey Ambaraka declined in less than 2 seconds. Tony Stark originally thought that after the last time, he would not be rejected when he contacted Harvey Ambaraka, but now he couldn't help but swear when he heard what Jarvis said. Well, this guy is really as difficult to contact as ever. Sir, the other party may think that you are looking for him, and maybe he has something to trouble him, so he refused. Jarvis said from Harvey's point of view. Jarvis, I didn't expect to hear such cold and realistic words from your mouth. Tony Stark said sadly when he heard what Jarvis said. Then do you still need to keep in touch? Jarvis asked after hearing it. No, I'll go find him myself, and you can find someone to prepare lunch for me. After hearing the words, Tony Stark gave a direct warning, and then drove off by himself. Harvey Ambaraka lives most often in the wealthy villa area in Brooklyn. That location was not too far from the Stark Manor where he was, so it wasn't difficult to find it in the past. In just over half an hour, Tony Stark came to a luxurious manor covering an area of thousands of square meters. Tony Stark got out of the car and rang the doorbell. Harvey clicked on the door to reflect the scenery on the wall in a projection way, and found that Tony Stark was coming, so he opened the door. This guy is too extravagant. Tony Stark drove in, looked at the surrounding layout, and muttered. His Stark Manor was already luxuriously built, but for the really valuable things that were underground, there weren't that many extravagant and useless things. But Harvey's manor seems to be full of valuable things, and it occupies a much larger area than his Stark Manor. Tony Stark had investigated Harvey, so he drove along the aisle all the way to a luxuriously decorated mansion without Harvey giving directions. And Harvey had already opened the door and was waiting for him. "It's Chinese New Year, you don't stay at home, spend the New Year with Pepper, what's the matter with me?" Harvey's words were heard before Tony Stark greeted him friendly. "I think you must celebrate the New Year alone, so I want to play with you." Tony Stark looked at Harvey, who was wearing house clothes. He didn't feel embarrassed at all, and said with a smile, "Don't do this with me. According to your personality, this is not a reason to find me. Tell me directly, what can you do with me?" Harvey waved his hands when he heard the words, not believing it at all. "Let you guess, but I already asked Jarvis to prepare lunch, go to my house and chat." Tony Stark paused when he heard the words, and spoke, completely forgetting the words that Harvey Ambaraka would never be asked before. "You ask Jarvis to add 2 more beef feasts for me on the original basis, and I will go to your house for a visit. I eat more than usual during Chinese New Year." Harvey heard what Tony Stark said, and spoke. "Don't talk about 2 cows, even 10 cows are not a problem." Tony Stark patted his chest when he heard this and agreed. "Okay, I'll change my clothes, wait for me." Harvey nodded and closed the door. A few minutes later, Harvey came out, already changed into a delicate suit, showing elegance and handsomeness. He can wear whatever he wants at home, but he still has to wear clothes that suit his status when he goes outside. Harvey opened his garage. After thinking about it, he chose a low-key and practical silver BMW. No wonder there are many young rich women in the upper class of New York who want to invite you to the banquet. "You show off, TSK, you have the demeanor of my youth." Seeing Harvey Ambaraka's appearance and extremely elegant movements, Tony Stark spoke. With Harvey Ambaraka's young, handsome and strong figure, coupled with his elegant temperament at first glance, it is not surprising that some rich women can be in love. "Tony Stark, why are you paying attention to this gossip if you don't study your light bulb?" Harvey drove to Tony Stark's car, lowered the window, and said in a speechless voice, "Definitely not my concern. Pepper helps me run Stark Industries and has to attend various events. And you and I are friends from the outside world, so many people ask Pepper about you. Don't you occasionally spend a good night with some young beauties? Having a relationship with them will not only allow you to enjoy, but also bring you a lot of convenience. Why are you not interested in them at all?" Tony disregarded the relationship when he heard the words, but asked some gossip again. "Is it those young and beautiful women who don't have much status and are easy to get rid of, or those young rich women? Aren't you more experienced than me?" Harvey rolled his eyes when he saw Tony's gossip. "Makes sense." Tony Stark heard this and understood. "Let's go." Harvey said something, closed the window and drove off. Tony Stark also drove and quickly chased after him. But half an hour. Harvey followed Tony Stark to Stark Manor. Because of the Chinese New Year, the Stark Manor still had some decorations. "Mr. Harvey Ambaraka, long time no see." A small smile spread across Pepper's face as he saw Harvey Ambaraka approaching. "Long time no see, Miss Pepper." Harvey responded politely when he heard the words. "We're going to have a chat below, Pepper, you stay here for a while." Tony Stark said it directly. Then he entered the underground research room with Harvey Ambaraka. "Welcome, Mr. Harvey Ambaraka." After seeing Harvey's arrival, Jarvis said respectfully. Jarvis released the table of elements. Tony Stark said it directly. Soon, the entire periodic table of elements appeared. "I've tried all the elements, but I haven't found any substitute elements at all. Harvey Ambaraka, do you think there is really an alternative element?" Tony Stark rested his chin on one hand, a heavy look on his face. According to his understanding of Harvey Ambaraka, the other party said that he was trying to find alternative elements to improve the arc reactor. Then it implies that there must be an element in the world that can replace palladium. But no matter how hard he searched, he couldn't find a new element to replace it, which made him fall into a bottleneck period. "I knew you must have something to do with me." Harvey's eyes flashed when he heard this, and he spoke. Episode 29, Tony's Strengths. "I have no way, I have tried all the elements I know. If you don't find you, there is no direction to start with. Is it possible that the world that you superpowers come into contact with has elements that I don't understand or even hear about?" Tony Stark also showed some helplessness when he heard Harvey's words, and said, "It has nothing to do with the world that super ability users come into contact with, but it's not impossible to tell you." After hearing this, Harvey thought about it and said, "Originally, as long as SHIELD finds Tony Stark and knows the problems Tony Stark is facing, he will help Tony Stark. But he could push the process forward a little. It has nothing to do with the world that the superpower user comes into contact with? So which of these elements are replaceable? Or do I take into account the chemical transformations that come with bonding?" Tony Stark asked in great confusion upon hearing the words. It's not these elements, but you want to create a new element to replace the palladium element and stabilize the arc reactor. That way your iron armor will be even stronger. Harvey said when he heard the words. Create new elements? Tony Stark immediately started a brainstorm when he heard the words. Tony Stark, I remember your father was a genius scientist like you. Maybe you can get some inspiration from what your father left behind. Harvey reminded when he heard the words. What my father left behind? He left in too much haste, and left nothing behind. Tony Stark mentioned his father, his face became a little complicated, and he spoke. Indeed, your father left this company and huge amounts of wealth to you. But don't forget which party your father founded Stark Industries had the deepest connection with in the first place. Harvey didn't say anything but guided Tony Stark to find out. Tony Stark heard the words and thought about it. The history of his father's control of Stark Industry, combined with the organization that is most closely connected with Stark Industry, came up with an answer in his brain. But because of the arc reactor, Stark Industries' current relationship with the military is not as good as it used to be. Where should I go to ask the military for my father's relics left in the military? It's just that Tony Stark considered the status quo and started to think. On the surface, your relationship with the military is relatively stiff, and it may make things difficult for you. But didn't someone throw an olive branch to you? Harvey said when he heard the words. What bureau are you talking about? Do they have such advanced permissions? You have to know that they paid a high price even if they paid $20 million US. Tony Stark also realized when he heard the military that offered him an olive branch, but his tone was a little disgusted. In his opinion, the ambition of the Avengers to be formed is good, but in terms of status and power. Tony Stark didn't feel that the status of the Land Bureau was very high. After all, it was only $20 million US, not $200 million. This can be called a high price. That country is really poor enough. In other words, what kind of bureau in that country is being squeezed hard, and the agent is actually a hardworking worker? When Harvey heard that he had to apply for $20 million US, he definitely knew that Tony Stark was talking about Nick Fury raising money to meet him. They are a little poor, but since they claim to be agents who specialize in dealing with weird events, their authority status in the military should not be low. And whether the authority is high or not, you will know if you ask. So Harvey also understood and said. Okay, let me ask. Tony Stark heard what Harvey said, thought about it and decided to ask. JARVIS, put me in touch with Phil Coulson. Tony Stark directly instructed, and JARVIS immediately carried out the instruction upon hearing this. And Phil Coulson picked it up in less than 5 seconds. Mr. Tony Stark, is there anything I can help you with? Phil Coulson's voice immediately rang out in the underground research room. Because of Phil Coulson's almost second pickup speed, Tony Stark took a special look at Harvey. Harvey, on the other hand, ignored Tony Stark's ostentatious and complaining eyes. Phil Coulson agent, my father, Howard Stark, had a deep connection with the military in the past, and he should have cooperated a lot for the military. I wonder if your military has any relics of my father, Howard Stark. When Tony Stark said these words, there was a slight pause in his speech, obviously mentioning his father made him feel a little complicated. Does Howard Stark have any relics left? I can help you investigate the news about your father. Please give me an hour to find out if your father has any relics that have not been handed over to you. I will help you investigate. When Phil Coulson heard that Tony Stark really needed help, this was a good opportunity to build friendship, so he agreed without any nonsense. Okay, then please. Tony Stark heard that he could really help with the investigation, glanced at Harvey Ambaraka, and then said in a serious tone. Give it to me. Phil Coulson responded and hung up the communication. If he really helps me find it, then it can be said that I owe them a favor. Tony Stark said when he saw Phil Coulson's excited and fast-handling attitude like taking hormones. Usually if you want to get something, you have to pay a little price. But it's just to get back the relics left by your father. The file size of this favor depends on what you think. Harvey said indifferently when he heard the words. Returning the relics can only be regarded as returning the relics to the original owner, but if I discover new elements through my father's relics. If the arc reactor is improved, then this favor will not be too small. Definitely, if it is really developed, I will not forget the kindness you reminded, Harvey Ambaraka. Tony Stark said when he heard this. These are small things. Harvey looked at Tony Stark and said with a smile. Although Tony Stark has always been narcissistic and arrogant, and his words are often very ugly, but the distinction between grievances and grievances has always been one of Tony Stark's strengths. Even if Tony Stark doesn't say it on the surface, he will remember the kindness he left for him in his heart. As long as the opportunity comes, Tony Stark will find a way to repay that kindness. So Harvey didn't mind calling Tony Stark a little bit. After all, Tony Stark can be a great friend after a friendly friendship has been established. Episode 30, Rare Opportunity. Harvey Ambaraka, can you answer a question for me? Immediately, Tony Stark looked at Harvey, hesitated for a moment, and spoke. Let's hear it, let me think about it. Harvey's eyes flickered when he heard this, but he didn't immediately agree. It's that after you treated me last time, my health has improved several times. Not only did I become a few years younger, but it also improved my physical fitness a lot. Can that kind of super ability make me not look young, but can improve my physical fitness? Tony Stark looked a little dodged, and said. Since being treated that time, Tony Stark can clearly feel that his body has undergone huge amounts of changes. His 5 senses have become more acute, and his strength and physical strength have been significantly improved. Although the speed of the explosion is not as fast as the physical limit of human beings, it is far beyond ordinary people. Normally, if he stayed up late and worked for a few days in a row, his 38-year-old body would not be able to bear it long ago if he didn't take a good rest. But after the treatment, he only needs to sleep for 3 to 4 hours a day to clear away any fatigue and maintain a vigorous state. Moreover, his mind is more sensitive than before, which is why he has continuously updated and iterated the iron armor in just 2 months. Most importantly, 2 months have passed. Tony Stark didn't feel any side effects in his body. This made him realize that Harvey Ambaraka's ability is definitely not just healing and rejuvenation. Instead, it can directly help people strengthen their bodies, and this kind of strengthening is not just for a short time. The last time Harvey Ambaraka was treating him and helping him strengthen his body could easily jump more than 2 meters high. What if Harvey Ambaraka didn't just help him treat and strengthen, but really wanted to help him further strengthen his body? He doesn't need to specialize in the research and development of genetic medicines, and then conduct some experiments that go against human reason. Tony Stark, didn't I tell you just now that if you want to get something, you often need to pay something? So your idea of wanting to have both is impossible. Harvey already knew upon hearing the words that Tony Stark had already developed the idea of longing for power, and said slowly. It's just that Tony Stark wants to get a stronger body, and wants to maintain his current appearance so that others will not notice that his body has changed. This is obviously impossible. Not even Harvey himself, since he awakened the system to get the ability from the void. 3 years have passed, and his current appearance has not changed much from when he was an adult. Harvey believes that not only in the past 3 years, but even in the past 10, 50, or 100 years, his appearance will not change. Because the power of the void made his life form out of human. In the future, his body is not ordinary, even if he deliberately hides it, it will be exposed. But even if it is exposed at that time, his strength has evolved to the point where he is not afraid of everything, so he doesn't care too much. Is there really nothing to do? Tony Stark said with some disappointment upon hearing the words. Tony Stark, I should have told you before. My power is not a super ability, it's just a power beyond your cognition for you. You can think that it belongs to a kind of super ability. Harvey said calmly. It's not super ability, so what kind of power is it? Tony Stark asked with some doubts upon hearing the words. Although your current strength has not surpassed the limit of human beings, it also allows you to have extraordinary physical fitness. Isn't this enough for you, who was originally just a commoner's physical fitness? If you want to further enhance it, then not only your physical fitness will start to break away from the scope of human common sense. The same is true for your lifespan. It will last at least a few hundred years, or even 1,000 years, or even longer. I can help you, and even give you power that you can't imagine. After all, for me, it's just a casual thing. But are you sure you're mentally prepared? Harvey glanced at Tony Stark upon hearing this, and said slowly. Can I also be like you, possessing powerful and incredible power without the aid of technology? When Tony Stark heard Harvey Ambaraka's words, his eyes were filled with shock, and he said in disbelief. You can master incredible power, but you are unlikely to reach my height. As for the reason, I won't explain it. If you really want to, you will understand it after you master it. Regarding this question, Harvey did not deliberately conceal it, but shook his head. He didn't know what kind of ability Tony Stark would get after he believed in and joined the void. Now the power he has evolved 283 times is already very terrifying. But this is only his starting point, so it is impossible for Tony Stark to catch up with him. Tony Stark fell into thought when he heard these words. Possessing superhuman strength can be viewed as awesome by others, such as those apex athletes who break records time and time again. Instead of being intimidated, people will feel admiration when they see it. But once you break away from the power within the scope of human common sense, you will be regarded as a different kind by others, and you will feel a kind of fear of you. He wanted Harvey to help him strengthen his body, but he didn't want his body and appearance to look too young, so that others would know that he was an outlier. That's why he asked Harvey Ambaraka that way just now, and the response he got was impossible. If you can have a long lifespan and gain power far beyond ordinary people's cognition, it can be said that countless people dream of it. Otherwise, there wouldn't be so many unconstrained, fantasy-filled movies and animations. Now that this opportunity to gain fantasy power came before him, Tony Stark felt a little hesitation. Once he got it, Pepper, whom he admired and trusted very much, might look at him strangely. And a lifespan of hundreds of years or even longer sounds very good. But as time passed, he still maintained his youth, while the people around him grew old and died step by step. That scene makes Tony Stark sad just thinking about it. But if he refuses this time, he may also miss an opportunity to completely change his life. Harvey Ambaraka, thank you for giving me this opportunity. But can you give me some more time to think about it carefully? So Tony Stark looked at Harvey Ambaraka and said sorry. If you are really mentally prepared, you can mention this matter again, and I will consider it then. Harvey didn't mean to urge Tony Stark either, neither did he expressly agree or refuse. Harvey could understand Tony Stark's scruples. But Harvey knew that as long as Tony Stark had the idea of wanting more power, he would eventually join the embrace of the void. Whether I accept it or not, thank you for giving me this opportunity. Tony Stark's eyes flickered when he heard this, he nodded and said gratefully.